Live, going live, going blink, blink. Looks like we're live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Midweek Geek, and it's me, the old geek, and I'm here with Saxius, Omanal, and Sean from Mage's Musings, and hopefully Elfbait, who has been having technical issues. Elfbait, can you hear us now? Elfbait, can you hear us now?
Oh, technical issues.
Elfbait.
Eli, hello.
Yeah.
Well, you probably have to type it in chat there, John. That way you can make sure.
Well, clearly you can't hear us.
Yeah, that's. Well, he could just be really ignoring us. I mean, we maybe.
Oh yeah, he could be. Yeah. Just,
I mean,
just being ignorant, or just pretending he's trolling us. That's what he's doing.
I'm gonna go with a no.
Yeah, that's
A safe no.
Elfbait.
Well, he's talking, but he's also muted.
Well,
So.
he's muted, so
Yeah. Okay, right. And we have. I've been organised. That's what we were discussing just before the stream started. I've actually been organised for the first time in my life. Well, I've tried to be organised in the past. It's never lasted for very long. So let's see how long this lasts for. So we have got a semblance of organisation. And the first topic we're going to be discussing this year, because it is now 2023, Happy New Year to everybody, is the topic of fighters in fantasy role-playing games. The various fighter classes in various versions of games and systems, and how things have changed and what can be done to help fighters, and what you like about fighters and what you don't like about fighters, all that sort of thing. We're just going to have a bit of a deep dive into fighters. So I just want everyone to say hello first anyway. So Sax, just say hello to the fine people. We have 4 people in chat.
Hello, everyone. It's always great to be back here. Another year, another round of fun and discussions, and hopefully tips that people can walk away with, improve your games, and include your Excel sheets. Thank you.
And Omanal?
Well, I've been relegated to my room, so it's good to have everybody else there. But I won't have the ability to pull up like 600 different PDFs to try sorting through for fighters.
well, I think we have Elfbait.
Yes, it helps if you undo all of the mute buttons. I had the audio muted on my computer and didn't realize it.
So you didn't hear us making disparaging comments to you then?
No, but it wouldn't be the first time.
So
Omanel used the opportunity to get a leg up on his arguments with you.
I don't like that. I like the back and forth. If it's not back and forth, it's just screaming at the void.
That's called Twitter.
It doesn't help that I like to argue.
Well,
we can see that. Both of you do.
Well,
yeah.
Actually, the funny thing is I think in some ways, if we talk past each other and then we go, yeah, okay, I agree with that part. And it's like, oh, okay, but it was. I think sometimes the problem with the internet is you just assume the worst on either side, and you're like, well, I don't think that's exactly what we're trying to mean. But it's fun.
So let's go around and say hello to people. Sean, would you like to greet chat for the first time this year?
Well, hello, chat. Hello, how are you doing? Ooh, there's Halakar. We like Halakar and Saxius. Well, Saxius is on the stream. And me do. We have a new person here. Me do. Welcome to Me do.
And there's
Slan. He's way up to the top there.
Very good. Yep. And Elfbait, say hello to everybody.
Hello, I'm Elfbait. I am a man of few words unless I'm arguing with Omanel.
You're a horror on furniture. That's what you are.
Now I'm going to say something.
We've also just been joined by
me...
Hungar and Rodrigo Beowulf as well. Hello, chaps.
Now, have you cleaned up the basement there? Because it looks like it's a bit more organized behind you.
No.
Oh, okay.
That's an illusion.
I actually was doing a similar
I got
illusion.
more crap in my basement that's disorganized now. I just actually managed to secure a couple of hardwood glass display cases
very nice.
into which my miniatures will be going. And then I got some bookshelves onto which my books will go, so they're not in piles everywhere.
Hey, remember how we were talking about, well, I'm envious of some of the books you have? Well, it doesn't matter if you don't have some kind of storage to put them in. So I'm envious of the fact you have bookshelves. So.
Yeah. But hello, everyone.
I was going to say hello to Rodrigo Beowulf, and Fat Gamer's joined us. Fat Gamer, your name, Gamers, but you must be the Fat Gamer, as I am the old geek. We're all old geeks, and most of us are fat gamers. let's face it. And Mar Hawkman's here as well. Hello, Mar.
It's the sweater.
So
he's going to rip the sweater off. He's going to have like the 6-pack, and
I've got the
Hercules game, brother.
Yeah, I've got the middle age spread entirely in my gut, but my arms and legs are still spindly like they were when I was young.
I have a 6-pack of beer. I mean, it counts.
I have noticed that my face has got considerably more rotund compared to when I first started making videos about 2 years ago. So that needs to come back down to some healthy state in the next year or so. That's one of my New Year's resolutions. I want you to all hold me to that. Geek, how much weight have you lost?
It's not the weight that you've lost. It's how much fat.
It's the friends you made along the way.
Because if you suddenly gain 20 pounds of muscle, that will look far better than losing 10 pounds of fat.
The problem is, I think I've lost about 10 pounds of muscle and gained about 30 pounds of fat in the last. So it's a bit of a.
So what you're
bit of a
telling
up
us
and down
for the new year. So what you're telling us is for the new year, you want us to hold you accountable like a fighter. Hence why you've picked this topic. You are a clever man.
Hello, Tom. The shepherd's hook, pulling us back in.
Exactly.
He doesn't have the money to pay for training. That's the problem. So he's been stuck at second level for years.
It's because the thief keeps taking all the gold.
The wife.
Well, and that was the last I ever heard of Geek.
It was a great time, guys. Wonderful.
Pair of feminine hands reach in from off screen and start throttling him, and then cuts out.
Well, three of the letters up in wife are present in thief, so there's a bit of crossroads there.
Just keep digging deeper, man.
I'm not saying anything.
As long as he doesn't take advantage of the backstab, you're okay.
I'm more concerned about the skills that thieves have. Pickpockets, sleight of hand. A lot of things can go missing.
Very much. Anyway, we do have a topic. We've been organised. We have a topic, and we are going to. We're going to be having a series of streams on deep dives into the various classes. They're not going to be every week. We're going to intersperse it with other topics to mix it all up. But we're going to start with that classic character class, the fighter. It's been with us from the beginning. It's still with us today. It has morphed into many different things over the years. So we've got to. It's a case of where did it come from? Where did it go? Where did it come from? Cotton Eye Fighter. Sorry, I do apologize. Of course, as you are all aware, the fighter started off as the fighting man in
OD&D.
In OD&D. And the only thing that really set them aside, I believe, was the fact that they could use whatever armor and weapons. And did they have more hit points back then? I don't know much about OD&D rules. Does anybody know much about OD&D rules?
The white box? Yeah, I don't remember if it was all a D6 or not. It
was all D6s back then.
Yeah, but I don't know if they had a mechanic for getting more.
It was a die, which was a D6 plus a number. So that's to measure the strength
Right.
of a fighter back then. So you weren't just a man-at-arms or another, pleb. You were a man-at-arms +1, which meant that you had a bonus for your hits, for your damage, for your health, and so forth, because it
Right.
all originated in the wargaming roots. So rather than going
And
out of
that
their way and
is
doing
that +1 what set them aside in combat to other classes?
Yes.
Because
Yeah. So you would find that is that you had +1s, +2s, +3s, and then you moved up to things like knights in terms of like how you had to measure your stats, abilities, your health points, and so forth. Again, that's how they did it way back in the day.
I think only fighters could benefit from strength and con bonuses as well.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Incentivized them. And it's also why you saw a lot of fighters. I mean, thieves was a class that actually wasn't
In the
really
originals.
they weren't really created back then, as far as I remember.
Thieves came out later in the
Yeah,
original
yes.
D&D,
Greyhawk, I think, or
Yes.
Blackmore, or one of those. Yeah.
but still in OD&D. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the one, yeah.
It was-
Because I've just
Because
it was
cleric
fu-
wasn't part of the original setup either.
Yeah, it was actually.
was
Was it?
Are
I
you
thought
sure
cleric
there
came
were
in
three
later.
classes?
Hold on. Let me get my book. It's just out of reach here.
Oh,
Maybe
somebody's
I'm-
got the book. Oh, look at the show-offs who've got the white book. The white box.
I could be going back to my memory of pre OD&D where like they were getting the basics together. That could be it. Because I know cleric
Yeah.
didn't come from Gygax. It came from another part of the.
I mean, I think it was either him or Dave Anson that came up with
Well, there's a
it.
third guy in the original mix too.
Yeah, here in the first book, Men and Magic, you could be fighting men, magic users, clerics, and then there's dwarves, elves, halflings, and
No, lovely.
yeah,
Thanks.
Because I remember just recently hearing something about like the cleric was somebody else's invention who actually pulled in this whole concept of religious order. It was not part of the Arnis and Gygax mix or something like that, but I could be remembering incorrectly.
that might have been the case before they finally published it as Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah. And like I said, I may be going
We'll have
through
to find
proto
out-
D&D memory.
Anyways, back on.
We'll have to
the fighting
we'll have to
man.
dig out. We'll have to dig out that nugget for when we cover clerics in a few weeks, months, however, whenever. So, when we moved on to, I mean, my earliest D&D recollection was I had the Beckme Red Box, but I was also aware of the BX, the Moldvay edition, where very much you got the separate fighter class, and now they'd got more hit points. They'd got a wider range of armor, and they could use all weapons. But that was pretty much it. From what I really remember, they didn't start with particularly good saves, even though they started with the same attack matrices as every other class.
Everyone, yeah.
Everyone, yeah. Their only real benefit was the fact that they would be able to wade into combat if combat was necessary with a better armor class and better weapons.
And
Well, they would also have consistent like increase of their to hit or their attack would just
See,
improve.
Hungar.
So
But-
you'd
but-
be
well-
seeing-
But I mean, that didn't happen until later levels. If we're going to talk about old BX, the old BX, it really didn't do that. If you look at even the old Dungeon Master's Guide, it wasn't until level 3 that you got any improvement in your attack for fighters. I mean, now it says it's an optional rule in the Dungeon Master's Guide that you can give a +1 every level. But
That's in AD&D, yeah.
yeah. But well, I mean, since we're talking about both here, but the big thing I think was, and I know since Sean's really been playing it, but look at how cheap plate mail was for the old BX. It's like 60 gold pieces. It's like, okay, you're always taking this, but you're just slow. Now, to be fair, they have double the hit points of fighters, of thieves and magic users. So that makes a huge benefit for them.
Potentially double. You're not necessarily going to be
Yeah.
playing with somebody who gives you maximum.
Well, that's true. I really started appreciating Constitution for other classes more than just fighters with them. Whereas the advanced Dungeons and Dragons, they had a D10, and they could get up to +4 hit points rather than just +2 for all the other classes.
Well, it was with AD&D, was it, that the fighter really started getting its own more defined niche, in that it advanced quicker through the attack tables. Okay, it's saving throws started off bad, but improved quicker than other other classes. They got the advantage of percentile strength. They got the advantage of improved constitution bonuses. And then there was the multiple attacks against small, low hit dice creatures. One attack per level against less than dice. And then, but again, that was pretty much it for lots of weapons. They had lots of weapon proficiencies, but that was pretty much it for fighters.
And they were but if you look at it, only magic users advanced slower than they did compared to clerics and thieves. Because clerics required 1,500 XP.
Yeah, I mean,
almost for first level, and then they double up from there. And then thieves were 1,250
at low levels. At low levels, but magic users accelerate. If you look at the magic users' experience points table, they accelerate through the mid levels very quickly, more quickly than fighters do. The jumps are quite small in terms of XP, around sort of, I think it's levels 4 through 9, and you'll get a magic user to a higher level than a fighter going through those levels more quickly. I mean, my words aren't coming out properly. So fighters always got a bit of, I think, a bit of a raw deal when it came to experience points and level gains. They never advanced particularly quickly. And in relation to their subclasses, the Paladin and the Ranger, I think they which both advanced pretty slowly, but had a lot of extra powers.
I mean, that's sorry, finish your thought.
Yeah, I think the fighter got a pretty raw deal in AD&D.
I see. I don't agree with that sentiment, because I mean, the Paladin and the Ranger, as great as they are, they have severe limitations, whereas the fighter is unrestricted in terms of, morality. They get the advancement. They get to basically get a fiefdom. You get to level 9 and you got an army at your back. In addition,
what's this when you get to level 9?
It can happen theoretically. But the big thing that's not necessarily spelled out in the books is that fighters are probably going to be one of the most common classes. Now, if you're using the training rules and all that, they're the most likely to find mentors, right? Like, good luck finding, if you're looking at the actual demographics, a paladin is something like 1 in every 500 adventuring class, and adventuring class are 1 in every 100 in the population. So you got 1 in 5,000 kind of thing, or 1 in 50,000, or whatever the numbers work out to, whereas fighters are going to be a dime a dozen. And that's worth considering. That's worth thinking about, rather than just automatically defaulting, oh, you find a mentor, you train. It's like, no, a paladin could probably spend 3 levels looking for somebody capable of training him. So then it becomes incumbent on the paladin and the ranger to keep their rating at the right level so they can self-train. And that's stuff that's not necessarily spelled out in the books, but it's always worth thinking about.
And
I also just want to wade in and say that what is a party without their bread and butter? You need your fighters, just full on. The level of access is right there, and the absolute versatility that you're going to be getting from this little Swiss Army knife is just awesome. Whether you need a man who
these were points I was going to come to.
Well, then
these
get
were
to
points
them
I was
quicker
going to come to.
and get to them quicker.
I think in the category of things that aren't mechanically built in, I think the fighter is also one of the, and from a character concept idea, that standpoint, it's one of the more flexible. Like, fighter is a broad range of careers and
so much.
I mean, you can make a paladin style character, the knight in shining armor, with a fighter. You can make the grubby mercenary with a fighter. You can make Robin Hood with a fighter. You can make all of those archetypes from literature and film and all of that that you would want to with a fighter. I mean, and with wizards and rangers and paladins and stuff, your kind of your archetype niche kind of gets smaller.
They throw in like characters such as Sinbad into the same category as fighters, alongside Hercules, Perseus, Beowulf, just
Mhm.
and it can be all over the place, anywhere from the Greek macho men all the way out to the swashbuckling pirates, or those who sail the seas. You
I,
can find fighters of all forms and all backgrounds.
I mean, I know that Elfbait and I were arguing back and forth, but I think that's what I was trying to bring out with my point was you can be anything in there. The other part is if you look at a fighter compared to the other ones, and I'm not going to, I think that Sean and I have discussed another stream about just how powerful clerics are, but that's a different discussion. But if you look at a fighter, it's one of the few classes that can literally take a dragon breath head on. It's one of the few things that when you're at those levels, it will generally survive, whereas the other party members would be an instant death.
A dragon does have a legitimate reason to fear that high level fighter with a two-handed sword. Like a dragon should be worried, whereas any other character class, a dragon, maybe not the wizard, but he can get a drop on a wizard and he's done. But so no, I agree. I mean, like there's so many benefits to the fighter that just aren't spelled out in black and white. But when you see it in play, it's like, oh wow, the fighter's really good.
Let's not forget about the being a really easy introductory character class.
I was waiting for my time to jump in there, because whenever I get someone who's new, who's never played D&D before, it's just fighter is a great one, because then it's just a matter of like give them a good way of sort of inserting themselves into the world. And it's also it's simple. You can make it as complex as you want, and you can also make it as simple as you need it to be.
I absolutely cringe every time I have a new player who's like, "I want to play a wizard." I'm like, "Please don't."
Well,
I will openly say, are you creative and are you willing to read? No, here's a fighter.
It's the other part is, and then this is where I know that Elfbait and I were arguing about some, but the
It's
point
not going to be a common thing now. Elfbait and I were arguing about something.
We're arguing, but
we were, but part of the problem that I had and I noticed this when I was starting to do some of the OSC, because you start noticing some of the problems as you start playing multiple game systems. And when we're talking about fighters, we're also going to talk about other stuff. But since DCC is so close, the addition of the Mighty Deeds, and I'm not including all the other ones because DCC can be a complete mess once you go to Spellcaster. I mean, far worse than D&D. But the Mighty Deed ability in there is something that just is so easy, I think, for any character to pick up. That's one of those I would try transporting over into, whether it's into any D&D system, because it's so easy to just pop it in there. Here, you don't get a set bonus; you just get an extra die, and if you roll above this and you define the deed, you can do it. I think that's a wonderful addition from that aspect, because it keeps.
I knew you'd do that, Owen. I knew you'd jump about 2 hours. I've got a list. I've been organised. A list of things to go through in terms of fighters. And at
This
the
is what
end of
happens
the
to get
stream,
organized, John.
I was planning on addressing how other systems have developed fighters, and DCC is one of those. But that was due to be 2 hours down. 2 hours down the line.
Right, John. Here's how you fix that. You share with us the exact topics you want to talk about, and at what point. Otherwise, you're just opening. Otherwise, you just open up the gates, and the horses are going to run out wild.
Well, and I'm going to mention this because we're mentioning this is since Saxius brought up with the combat and tactics, which I do not have a book of, but I do know that there were some of those things in what was the Fighter's Handbook and a couple of other ones in there where they were starting to really broaden them out so they could do other things than just I roll a die to see if I hit. And I think that's a real positive that fighters are very easy at the beginning. Things go down, but as they get bigger and bigger, sometimes you just feel that you're kind of constrained of I rolled a hit. I rolled a hit. I rolled a hit. And it gets kind of boring from a player standpoint. And that's kind of unfortunate because really, the early fighters, that's all that they could do if you go to basic or anything else. Unearthed Arcana really gave them a bonus for the specialization. But then, I don't know how you guys were, but we just kind of cobbled it from others and said, well, I can do this or I can do that. And it's like, I don't think it made the game necessarily better by doing that because they were trying to separate out the two. And I just, so anyway.
No.
Yes. Well, we going back to my sort of little plan here.
Go on.
I was going to come back at my original point about fighters getting the raw end of the stick. by making the comment that the fighter forms the best basis mechanically for a lot of multi-class options in AD&D. The fighter thief, the fighter mage, these are traditional combinations. That halfling fighter thief, the elven fighter mage, they are strong, they fit with the theme of the race. I mean, and having that fighter as your sort of your basis, just to give your character a little bit of meat, is it's a good place to start. I like
was the original
and I
dip
think
class.
demi-humans were designed. Yeah, but you didn't dip in old D&D, did you?
I know, but
I think part of the thing is like you were talking about earlier, was the fighter felt, especially later in Dungeons and Dragons, especially when you look at advanced and then you start looking at the other options, was the only reason you play a fighter is because your race couldn't play anything else. And it was good to have so you could fight. So it crossed over. But really, if you were going to be a human, you were going to be playing Barbarian, Cavalier, Paladin, or Ranger. And that was kind of the intention. Was no, those are those specialty classes that only humans can take. Whereas Fighter was just, this is just so your elf just doesn't fall over dead from someone blowing on him. So.
Well, every race is going to have their fighting men, right? So
yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. That's why the barrier of entries just have 9 strength. You're gold.
And that's one of the other good things about those core classes, such as the fighter.
They're easy to qualify.
They're very easy to qualify for.
Well, and didn't almost all the demi-humans have to have like a strength of 9, except maybe the halfling? I'm not sure, but they were so close that it was almost
versions of
demi-humans did have certain requirements, like elves had to have
D&D.
a minimum dex and a minimum charisma, but that wasn't a lot of them had normal requirements. 3.
The only one that's got a strength requirement is the dwarf and the halfling and gnomes in the AD&Ds, but that's because that's the minimum that they have to have.
Yes.
Outside of that, everyone else is just sitting at 3.
Okay.
Half orc 6, dwarf 8, gnome 6, halfling 6.
Which is Yep. Well,
right. So we have touched on Unearthed Arcana, and clearly Mr. Gygax and the various writers of Dragon Magazine that created the articles that were pulled into Unearthed Arcana wanted to do something for the fighter, though, and they brought in weapon specialization. Love it or hate it, weapon specialization.
I'm going to put this
ambivalent. I use it, but I don't particularly love or hate it. I think it's an option, but I like to balance options. So, like for my AD&D game, I don't allow anybody specialize until level 4. Right? I want them to learn how to use their weapons, and before they choose what they're a master of. And so, I'm
going to say it's one of the most boring additions to fighters you can give. Here, you just get another bonus, and that's where sometimes, from a game point, is you want to give something cool to the other players and say, well, you can swing a little bit more often. What is it, 3/2 if you were specialized, and I don't remember what double specialization did, and then you get over and say, okay, and here's a +1/+2 to damage. That's about as boring as you can give a class. Whereas the clerics get these cool abilities, with spells. Thieves can get other abilities. I think that's been the real negative downside to fighters, was there was just no imagination to give them anything new within Advanced Dungeons and Dragons until you start talking about the combat tactics and some of the other stuff, which was the second edition.
I mean, in all fairness, they were the trailblazers, so they were figuring it out as they went along. Specialization, I think I'm kind of in the same area as Sean there. It never registered as anything particularly special. It was just another way to allow fighters to have something later on, whereas everybody else is getting nifty abilities. okay, you can. Here's a way to continue to enhance your fighting ability, which
It
is really
enhances
the
what
only
they
thing.
already do. Yeah.
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 Something that's important to note about the multiple attacks, at least for first edition, is those are attack routines, which means if you have more attack routines than your opponent, you go first. And that's actually pretty huge, guaranteeing an initiative every other round.
Well, that's a big impact, especially for a fighter.
Yeah. And then once
Well,
they get
it's-
to 7th level as a specialist, they're guaranteed 2 attacks per round, meaning any creature with only 1 attack routine, the fighter will go first regardless of the initiative roll. And I can't tell you how many times that has saved players' bacon
Oh,
getting
absolutely.
that first strike.
I also find that at least with the specialization, it's also a way for the players to then sort of go like, well, this is my character. This is the route he's going down on. It's not just I can pick up any weapon and swing them around fantastically. It's also I am a pole master. I am a sword and board specialist. I'm
I'm
a
that
Spartan.
rapier duelist, or
It allows for the players who are maybe not interested in the more here's all these special mechanics and special things, but they want the aesthetic of that. That's a way that you can at least dress it up by giving them mechanically. Here's something. Here's then how your character is perceived when you go around it. I know we're not getting into competent tactics as of yet, but at the very least, to me, when I look at the specialization, this is what I try to bring out. I mean, my current group, I've got a player who's got a magical weapon that can go anywhere from a footman's flail to a footman's mace, and it allows him to sort of switch between those fighting styles. And it's a very big thing for him that he's able to sort of portray this sort of dwarven savagery whenever he runs in, and he can sort of like swap around with how he does it, whether it's choking people out with a chain or if it's just bashing their heads in.
I'm going to mention, since we're flipping, I want to also mention that 5th edition with their Battle Master. I really did feel that should have been something that was just standard for all fighters. Instead of trying to give them a subclass for that, I thought that was kind of, I can do the normal feint, I could do this, but only if I pick this subclass. And I felt that was kind of a bad move for the design of it, is because, and I understand you doing 3rd level or something like that, is as players get the higher levels, they want to be able to do other stuff. Like the fire at the beginning is, okay, swing. Well, once you understand the mechanics, things should start flowing, then they should be giving you more options for that. And I felt that was kind of a short trip from 5E's perspective.
Yeah, I think if I were to redo it in a modern sense, building off of 5E, I would make the Battle Master the core fighter and still allow subclasses, just like they do for wizards and clerics and stuff like that. They're all going to have spells. Battle Masters are all going to have maneuvers. But now you have a flavor of fighter. We're not doing Battle Master anymore. We're just that's your fighter, and you get to pick your maneuvers to kind of build out your overall fighting style. And that can improve over time. But you could maybe be a Eldritch Knight still, or
I'd be more inclined to take those Battle Master techniques and make them available to anybody, but the Battle Master gets a massive bonus when using them, because that's their specialty, is the tricks and the tactics. Like you can have an ordinary fighter who's just a basher, he doesn't use any tactics, right?
But the fighters, I mean, that is their stick, that's their niche. So, I mean, do you mean like giving those Battle Master abilities to like wizards and thieves?
Yeah, anybody. Like you use them as pared down basic tactics that anybody who knows how to fight can do. It's just the Battle Master does them so much better. So they get those battle dice.
I do think we need to be careful, though. I mean, in terms of, we had a stream on niche protection a while back, and I think if you give too much to too many classes,
well, that is the main thing.
That's one of the problems with that, with most recent editions of D&D is I think the idea of each class having its specific niche has been pretty much lost.
Well, going back to what we were talking about before the stream started, with the combat and tactics, one thing I love about the combat and tactics book for second ed is that it's just a book of general combat options. Anybody has access to them. But yeah, there you go. It's that beautiful little book. Everybody has, it's just that the fighters are going to be better at them. right? So anybody can attempt to parry a blow or block a blow, but the fighter gets all of his bonuses, whereas everybody else is pitiful. So it's like, oh, I'm a wizard, I'll attempt to block with my staff. Sorry, the guy cut right through. Whereas the fighter will more likely than not achieve the success. I prefer systems like that, where, as you say, where everybody gets these niche abilities, and then you ask, well, why doesn't this character have this ability to parry a blow, right?
I think though that's really what we're talking about with niche protection. Whereas when you go to other systems like Warhammer Fantasy roleplay, you can do that, but because you get so many other different advancements and things that you aren't necessarily limited to that. But that's really more of a, I don't know, but that's more of a profession base that you can branch anywhere than just as a core class. And I think that's where I have to agree with the niche protection. It's cool to have those ideas, but part of me goes, well, if you wanted to learn those maneuvers, you should have been a fighter.
There can definitely be more advanced maneuvers that require fighting training, but there should be a definite list of abilities that anybody with even basic combat can attempt.
So basically what we're going for is that, certain things like blocking, parrying, that's those sort of like what we would consider to be basic.
Block, parry, feint, things like that, yeah.
I'd argue feint probably wouldn't fall under that, mainly because that is where you're then going to have to start, being able to do both your footwork and your proper wrist maneuvers to pull it off. That's just my perspective of it. I don't do HEMA, so I'm sure all the nerds are going to come at me for that.
In the original 1 minute round of AD&D, feints and things like that were considered to just be part of the whole round. That's having specific maneuvers in a minute. Spend the whole minute feinting. It's like, no, you're doing it all the time. But I want to do my usual greetings of because Elle's joined us. Saturnine's here. Errant Dragon has turned up. Michael Stronghold, Roland Bishop. So we've got plenty of people in chat now, up to 20 people. And something Sean said earlier about specialization. Having seen the impact the specialization had on the last AD&D campaign I ran, where I allowed Unearthed Arcana options, where we had a level 8 dwarven fighter who'd got double specialization in Warhammer, got a magic Warhammer and Gauntlet to Ogre Power. I can't remember. I think it was a +2 Warhammer, so the dwarf was getting +8 to hit, +12 damage, and was just absolutely mashing through everything.
Those ladies earned it.
Yeah, that's true.
I'm going to bring something up because we're talking about this. Is it really felt like fighters' special abilities were really coming from the magic items, the flaming sword, the flame tongue. And that's where it really seemed to come into it, was the magic items really favored the fighters in that aspect.
They did, yes. Yeah.
Now,
well, fighters and magic users. They were the two main classes that benefited from magic items, I think.
Yes.
The two of them can use the most.
Yeah, but I mean, if you look at the weapons, the sheer number of swords and everything else. And again, when we're talking about fighters, and we're kind of leaving these off in the background with the paladins and rangers. But
there'll be a topic for another stream.
No. You said fighter variants, which they are.
Okay. Okay. Towards the end of the stream, let's go.
But I'm just saying the basic core fighters, that really seemed to be the feel for it was, oh, okay, the fighter can wield the sword and even can now wield the intelligence sword that can cast fireball that way. And that's what it really felt like was, hey, the fighter will pick up a weapon that allows them to do other cool stuff rather than just being part of their core character class.
Well, that's the original aspect of it. I mean, but everything got more complicated and interesting. So,
but going back to that thing about weapon specialization, having seen the impact of that on that campaign, I would go with in a new AD&D campaign, I would go with Sean's rule of you can pick weapon specialization at level.
It's mine. I claim it.
Copyrighted.
I would say you have to pick your initial 4 weapons, and you can specialize in one of those when you get your next weapon proficiency.
Assuming you can find a specialist to teach you.
I'm gonna say,
but I wouldn't allow double specialization again.
Well,
And
again, I
yeah.
do allow it, but again, they have to get a level 7 and find a mentor to double specialize. So I mean, by the time you're at level 7, that's where the fighter sort of needs to catch up to the wizard in terms of damage output.
little
And
bit.
as you
Yeah,
say,
yeah.
that level 8 dwarf doing plus 12 to damage, that's on brand. Especially since he's only going to level 9 at maximum anyway. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I'm looking at more of the basics aspect for a lot of it, which is, how far can you go? You go up to level 14 for the most part, and then that's where it's supposed to stop. I know they later went on, and that's when they added non-weapon proficiencies and everything else. I kind of like the fact that if you look at the original aspect, is instead of worrying about weapon proficiencies, I like it that fighters just assume that they're good at everything for weapons. And I think that's one of the nice things about them is I can pick up a club, I can pick up a sword, I can pick up a pole arm, and I can use whatever's in there. Now that said is, for 5e, some of their feats really make fighters pretty terrifying.
We'll come to feats in a bit. Gonna say hello to Malachi, who's here while doing a bit of painting, and I haven't seen you around for a while, Munchy Gecko. But hello, welcome to the stream. Let's move on to second edition AD&D then, because I know a few of you are champing at the bit to talk about second edition options. Now, I quite like core second edition, and when I've run it in recent times, I've not used any of the players' options books. In fact, I cast eyes on those and discarded them and never considered buying them. So I'm not very familiar with a lot of the options in combat and tactics. I have got the complete fighter's handbook, and of all the handbooks, I think it's one of the best ones because it adds themes to your fighters without them being overpowered. I think there's a lot of very good kits in there, and of all the classes in the game, I think the fighter was the one that really benefited from having that type of handbook to just help guide a player into a theme. But for me, core second edition plus maybe the fighter's handbook and the thieves handbook, pretty much nothing else. That was about my limit. I think all the other classes were good enough already.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at some of it. As I'm trying to remember everything. Is at the time I just dove into it like, well, how can I min max? In retrospect, like that wasn't necessarily good for a game. Sometimes I like the old fighter is you just have your options, but part of when you start getting into the handbooks is they pretty much said if you didn't use the handbook, make sure that you use the non-weapon proficiencies as they are optional. Everyone forgets the non-weapon proficiencies were optional in second edition. They were not standard, even though we all played it that way at the time.
It's because they were more interesting. I mean, at least my group really dug having abilities and skills and stuff. So I really used the fighters, the handbooks. I liked them across the board for the most part because I was always of the mindset of trying to find that really cool concept for a character, and being able to have mechanics for it was great for me. So.
Yeah, I thought the splat books got a little absurd at points, but I did like them for the role playing things like they had when we described the elves and elven culture and fighters and different not only kits but personality types. I love it for that, but I basically banned any of the mechanical options unless I had a chance to go over it.
I mean, some of them were just dumb, like the Amazon. If you're fighting a male opponent and he's never met an Amazon before.
Yeah.
I the funny thing is, we just skipped over fighters, but you talked about fighter variants. We just ignored the ranger, the paladin, the barbarian.
That's for the end of the stream.
Oh, okay. Just making sure.
We're getting there, man.
It's at the end. Geeky would like to have an entire season of us just sitting and ranting and raving why the rangers are the best versions of fighters.
Yes.
First edition rangers are boss. They're downhill.
Just going to answer Mar Hotman's question here. I see people have been chiming in. Weapon proficiency specifically, all they did initially was negate a class specified penalty to hit. Weapon specialization took it and then gave you a bonus to hit, a bonus to damage, and more attacks per round.
Yeah.
And in the case of missile weapons, it added extra features as well.
Exactly. So again, going in for like second edition and the combat and tactics, the splat books and everything that it brought in. I mean, I like that with these things, it gave more, and especially once you start bringing in the proficiencies and all of the other skills that you could bring in for a fighter. You weren't just having a fighter, a stock standard sword board, whatever weapon, or slap them on there, so off they go. You can now bring so much more to it. You could be a miner. He could have skills. He could have all the other things that could not just encompass his class, but it could also encompass his personality, his background, his way of living, and with something such as combat and tactics. You also had more fleshed out rules, such as you want to do non-lethal damage. Using a sap. How is that going to be brought out and about? And that's something that, as Sean said, you can use that not just for a fighter, but you can also use that for the thief. If they wanted to have a club to knock people out. It even went into things such as what's it like if you're going to be doing climbing? How do you fight while climbing? Aerial combat, how is that going to be working out? How do you do initiative? It just helped expand out rules and give a better grounded framework. And I know in the pre-show, Geeky, you were joking like you should just make it up on the spot. But it's like some people just don't have that framework, or in my case, I'll be driven nuts knowing that the DM's going to be making up those rules. I'll be sitting and trying to memorize those rules, and then when we come up to the same encounter, that everything's thrown out the window. He makes something up on the spot again. It's at least at that point you're bringing everyone down and going like, okay, well, there is at least a groundwork that you can take, use, amend, but as a start, there's a launching pad. That for me, that's a very big thing. If you've got a launching pad for something.
Having it in the book really does help those folks who may not necessarily have the base imagination or even feel comfortable throwing out, I want to do the thing. They may like if it's not in the rules, can I really do the thing? And granted, that's probably more of a newbie problem than anything else. Because, as you gain experience in RPGs, you realize that it's not as rigid. But I think, second edition is probably a good example of where we're seeing D&D try to write for a broader, less niche audience. Where, because it was at that point that D&D was at its first heyday, and writing more clearly and adding in options that help people play the type of game you're wanting to run is a smart idea if you want to broaden your audience.
I'm going to bring up something too, which I think, if we're going to talk about 2E and 5E, at a certain point it becomes so broad that no one can memorize all the rules, and it kind of collapses under itself. I mean, it's really the core books, or it doesn't matter what game system, are really nice. And then as you add more and more, unless everyone knows everything, it's so hard to keep track of everything. It's hard enough to memorize what all the spells do, let alone if you're the dungeon master and you have to know what all the spells do.
No, you don't. No dungeon master knows what they all do. And you don't have to memorize them all. As a player, you have to memorize the ones that you use.
Yeah. That's what I mean, at least for me. That at the end of the day, it's the players' responsibilities to understand their character and understand the rules that apply for their character, because that's what their job is. This is your character. You should know that. If you come in session 6, 7, or 10 and start asking base questions of things that you should be having at level 3 or 4.
How much damage does my sword do?
Get out. Oh, get out.
See, I ran an AD&D campaign for 4 years without ever explaining the AD&D combat mechanics to my players.
Yeah, but there's a difference though, because you like it when you've got the full say over how it works, because no one's going to be questioning it. It's just going to go. It's going to be nice and smooth. Here's how we do it. And
it helps me improvise, because I like to just I'm a fly by the seat of my pants type deal when it comes to things like that.
I do try to tell my players, tell me what you want to do, not what you want to
Yeah.
roll or what mechanic you want to use.
No, yeah, absolutely. And a lot of it is just going to be it is just whatever they want is a simplified, okay, so this is the outcome you want to go for. Well, that can just mechanically be solved by doing X, roll Y, or do C. And then we know it, but it's the outcome that's the important thing, especially if it's a non-standard action. I want to a wonderful example is when I had one player go out exploring and encountering bullywugs. It was a real fear for many of the players that I would start using gang up tactics and I would have the bullywugs drag the player down and start, arguing, well, they've got, one bullywug sitting on each of his arms, each of his legs, one of his chest. He's technically mobilized. Coup de grace. He's used coup de grace methods and now he's dead. That's a real tactic that can be used. And I had more fun, hacking the character to pieces that I did, that I was looking for getting him, killed. But the character at the end of that was also doing things like, okay, I want to use one of my attacks to swing the weapon this way, and I use my other attack to kick this bullywug out of the way so I can get an opening. It's like, cool, that sounds fine. Do a normal attack plus a strength roll. There we go.
That's the sort of thing I do, and it just understanding the basic core mechanics and how they interact and how they work. You can just fly through without needing things to be codified for specific maneuvers.
But it doesn't hurt to have something so
No.
you can be consistent with it too.
It was pretty much what I was going to jump into, because literally where you could then jump into with combat and tactics is that they've actually got a brief rundown of what is unarmed combat, how can you do this, what is the knockdown die, how does this work, so you can quickly sort of look at it and go, right, this is the level of the character, this is what he's doing, this is the level of the opponent, there is this much of a difference, this much of a bonus, bam, he's knocked down. That's a quick way.
I'm going to, because we keep focusing on armor and tactics, I'm going to say, when armor and tactics came out, did it bring the fighter back up to being the premier frontline combatant, or was it just they're just sort of there as what they call nowadays a tank, as you're just a meat shield?
Because
it gave you a lot of options, so it really, and as Sean mentioned earlier, it was for combat in general. I mean, there was some stuff geared specifically towards fighters, but anybody who could fight would benefit, because combat and tactics was an overhaul of the combat system, not specifically the classes.
No, but it was great for the fighters to then sit down and go, there are actual mechanics that I can now make full use of that will change how I can approach it. Anywhere from then doing a shield bash, blocking, being able to, again, the whole idea of, the character can now do multiple things, standing next to the squishy wizard, fighting off one enemy while keeping his shield out to protect the wizard. That was it allowed versatility. And again, it wasn't just for fighter, as Elf said, it was the system itself, which the fighter is the core centerpiece of. They benefit the most from that.
I will say, if we're talking about second edition in general and things that got better for fighters also, or changed for fighters, it was one of their splat books, but the weapons and armor book, I really loved that one, because now, first of all, we got really good details, including historical examples of specific weapon types and armor types, and it broadened the armor. So, yes, they had leather armor in there, but they also had hide armor. So those barbarian characters might have a little bit more interesting, or maybe your fighter is from a savage people, but not using the barbarian class. You could have them be wearing that hide armor. They had rules for bronze armor, and I know weapons and I think weapons and the combat and tactics also talked about other historical weapons, Bronze Age, even Stone Age weapons and stuff like that. So there was a lot of cool options in that. But I particularly loved that we then got 3 kinds of shield, 3 or 4 kinds of shield. So they were mechanically different. My buckler worked different than my shield, and a tower shield worked different than a shield.
Well, what's interesting is you actually look at some of I think it's going back to 1E. If you actually read some of it, depending on the size of the shield, determining how many people you could block.
Yes. That's in both 1E and
Yeah.
second ed.
Yeah, I mean it was one of those things a lot of people just ignored for armor class. Oh well, whatever. It's like buckler could do 1, was regular shield was like 3 or something like that.
Medium shield in second ed is 3.
Okay.
Small shield is 2. In first edition, a small shield is like 1, and a buckler is 1, and you need a large shield, like the tower shield, to do 3.
Okay.
But yeah, I definitely apply that for sure. It's important.
I think that those are. I agree with you with the weapons and armor. You know, those are all. Well, no, and this was the age before the internet when we weren't sure what a lot of these weapons and armors even look like.
Speak for yourself. I had a library card and I was more than willing to use it.
What's funny is if you talk about that is I had been to Germany, you know, and they have all of the museums. So I've been to museums, but what weapons are called in German are different than what they're called in English. So,
well, that and so many of the weapon names in the game are academic categorizations that or categories rather than actual usage of the time.
Just look at the sword and how it broadens long sword, broadswords, and how that just.
Which is actually interesting because that's one of the things 5th edition kind of got right, because they're like the long sword is the long sword and it functions like the long sword. It's 1- and 2-handed. They got rid of the short sword is basically anything from an arming blade down to a gladius, and so it's the one that was always funny is I remember everybody always clamoring over broadswords.
Oh, Bastard Sword was the other one.
Bastard Swords in first and second, they're king.
Yeah.
Bastard Swords and then the broadsword. Everybody wanted broadswords because we all thought it was what Conan had because he had the really wide blade. Because he had that more primitive, cross section of the blade. But
and the key with the broadsword was the basket hilt.
Yeah, after I started after I got into the SCA and was part of the Scots Guard and carried one, I knew the difference. So. Imagine me in a great kilt carrying a Lochaber axe and a broadsword and a brace of pistols and
a brilliant beard.
I didn't have a beard then. I was 13, dude. Armed to the teeth and 13.
Something I like about first and second, because they're pretty much parallel, is the sheer weapon variety. And for the most part, there's a good reason to take any given weapon.
And that's before you even get into Oriental Adventures.
Yeah, even before you get there. And you're just talking about the broadsword. I got one of my players, that's his go-to weapon. He likes the broadsword because it does 2d4 damage to small and medium. So he gets his average of 5 damage per roll. He doesn't like the swinginess of the d8, so he takes the broadsword. And that's, it's like great. And others are like, no, I like long swords because they're the most common, most likely to find a magic weapon. Me, I like the bastard sword because of the versatility, especially against large creatures. And first and second ed does it well. And then you get to 5th ed where it's like, the weapon variety is meaningless. All the weapons are basically identical, just reskinned.
But it's also how you can use the different weapons. Like, if you take, for example, things like a halberd or some of the other, pole arms, and you brace them, and you expect to be charged, it's like, well, that will immediately do like twice or 3 times the damage.
Double damage, yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
Edition, that's all gone though.
Exactly. But it's
gone.
another like major boost, especially if you are one competent with the weapon, if you're specialized with it, and then you just have all of these things that like it boosts what you're already good with. And then now you're having a very good your fighter for that, who's prepped for it. Yeah,
shifting back to combat and tactics, the other thing is there's a whole list, there's a section where every weapon has a special ability that you can do. Certain weapons are better at parrying, so you get a +2. Other weapons are like the hand axe. If you do a call shot against somebody's shield, you can split their shield.
Go on.
I'm going to be unpopular in this one. While I love the idea of being really cool, from a mechanical standpoint, like I just want things to be easy. Yes, I had a book on medieval warfare talking about different axes and stuff like that. And at a certain point, if we're going by first and second edition where it's 1 round per attack, that's all assumed to be in there somewhere for the most part. And I think that's I think that was part of the downfall for first and second edition, was that as players we all wanted that one attack, but when you actually read Gygax, He's saying it's a flurry of attacks where one of them will connect.
Where one is your opening, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm going to argue with you here, Omanel. Surprise, surprise.
yeah.
No,
no.
no. I feel like the argument of all the nifty weapon things, slows everything down, is a phantom argument, honestly, because at any given time you're maybe going to have 2 or 3 special weapon special abilities in play at any given time, and most of that's on the player to do. So if you're using a use Sean's example, a hand axe that can split a shield, that's up to the player to remember. And and if you've got like the extra parry sword, that's for you to remember. As the DM, I'm going to maybe have to remember those now and again. On the other hand, I also don't have to, because the mooks in the combat don't need all the special abilities necessarily. Just like in literature and film and everything, they're the masses, they don't necessarily need that. Now, when the lieutenant or the hobgoblin chief walks out, sure, he's going to get it. But all of the rest of the hobgoblins, they're just doing base damage.
And remembering weapon abilities is no different than remembering all the spells.
Yeah, like at the end of the day, like it's because
you want the player,
you want the fighter to have something. Well, here is something, in the form of here's the weapon. Here's how the weapon defines you. It will impact your combat abilities, but there's going to be some extra rules on top of it. You can't have both things. You can't have a cool character with cool abilities and keep it simple. There's something's got to give in there. You've got to be able to. Go on.
Well, keeping it simple there is the point, I think.
Rather than individual weapons. Like, do you need 15 different types of swords? Or does swords can do X, axes can do Y, and halberds or polearms can do Z?
If you're arguing that fighters are boring,
well,
then one of the best ways to make them not boring is to give them a variety of gear to use.
Well, there is also
just like wizards have 8 million spells they can use, but most wizards only choose 5.
Thing is, earlier on in the stream, we were saying one of the benefits of the fighters is we give the fighter to the new player because they're so simple. With all these other options, are they still as simple?
Yes,
but they can grow into them.
Yeah, because you make them as complicated as you want them to be. Do you want the game to be simple? Well, then don't use any of these things, and you can have fun with that. Well, do you want your character to be highly competent? Well, then you've got to put in some effort here. This is a part of the game. It's no different than the wizard showing up and going, "Oh yeah, how many dice of D6 do I have for my fireball again?" It's like.
Well, and I'm going to agree with Halakar here, and this is what I was referring to as well, is the AC adjustments dependent on armor, which was bad in the way they did because they just assumed armor classes. Well, they ignore dexterity and then do this. Like, I have no problem. And to be fair, as much as I'm talking about individual weapons, and you can look at Conan, every weapon has its own individual specialty stuff. The question really comes down to, this is why I know we talked about DCC a little bit earlier, was that's why I like the Mighty Deed aspect, is you can have signature moves with certain weapons built in for that. But yeah, it just depends on what everything is in there. It's just, do you need, my real question is, how many pages of rules do you need for this, is when it really starts coming down to it. And part of it also, from my perspective, is this sword really that much different from that sword? And I'm starting to learn as you start listening to different people's, it's little minor idiosyncrasies that people are making out into huge advantage or disadvantage.
Well, go on.
Well, I'm saying it's a short sword's one thing, a long sword, whatever you want to call it, is another, and then a two-hander. Okay, those are real different weapons as far as lengths and stuff like that. But when you're going over and like, well, the gladius does this versus the whatever, I can't remember what the one is that the Greeks used, which is nearly identical to what the Romans had.
The coppice is very different from the gladius.
Well, I mean, there's different. Well, they had different swords too. It's
Well,
that's the
that's
other thing.
true, but
Yeah,
Okay, so
I mean,
let's also let's just take a step back because a lot of the weapon advancements was also to find a specific weakness that could be exploited. Like the Falx was used by the Thracians and the Dacians when they were fighting the Romans because it was good at getting around and having that a reversed what's it called scimitar
yeah,
blade. It allowed them to like pick into the actual helmets. The one piece of armor that most of the Romans believe like, oh, this is our super strong helmets. You will be safe with that. Nope, dunk, you're dead, and then that's
Yeah.
the shield wall collapsing. But that's again, it's the weapon. It can be a very big part of the fighter defining what they are like, how they fight. But it's also down for the player for then deciding, how deep do you want to go into it? Because one of the things that I wanted to highlight is that you can, as a rule, you can just turn around and be like, well, we don't, rather than having specialization for the one weapon, just a longsword, we will just do specialization for weapons called swords. And then that's it. There's no masters, there's no grandmasters or any of that form. You're now just doing it all by group, and then that's it, just to keep it simplified. That allows the fighter to then not feel left out if you find, oh, it's a broadsword, it's a short sword, it's this kind of sword, and then they can keep whatever look and aesthetic that they want without having too much of an impact. But if you want to then have a niche from the very get-go, have special abilities down to the weapons, well, then you're going to be narrowing things down a bit more. Oh, I forgot. Okay, yeah.
The other thing too is to consider is I don't think that every weapon in the weapons and tactics, it's not like every weapon had a specifically unique. There was a lot of repetition in there, so a lot of weapons did this in to Omen's a lot of the swords are similar.
Yeah.
Yes, and mechanically a lot of them are similar, but weapons and tactics or combat and tactics and the weapons and armor book were really trying to go ahead and show you what was out there so you could fit your mind's eye imagination to the game mechanic weapon. And that was a big advantage there. It's like, I want that sword that the Greeks had. Well, this is what it was called, and this is what its mechanics are. And if you look at it, it's the same as a short sword, maybe, but now you know.
Yeah. Well, and that's sometimes when we get into it is, how do I want to put this? Sometimes it feels like a skin rather than really being a mechanically different. From a video game, it's like, I want it to look like this. Well, okay, that's fine. However that works, I have no problems with.
That's true.
And believe me, I like that aspect of weapons as much as, but sometimes, and this is where it gets into it, I understand, is when you start adding, and this is where weapon speed, armor class adjustment, which really they got rid of in second edition, if I remember correctly. Did they add that back in?
It was there in second. It was just in a different form.
Okay.
It was
very
weapon
much
type
simplified.
Yeah,
Okay.
like a blunt weapon was had a bonus against chain, but a penalty against plate or something like that.
Oh, good God, no! Kick that out.
Yeah, I never
The
used it
exact
in second ed.
Yeah.
That's where we start seeing too much. The rules just going too much back down into simulationism, but that those rules were also in 1E. It was just something that they brought over. It was just, I don't think it wasn't in the core book. It was something that they brought out in. Oh God, I don't have the book now, but yeah.
See, I use it in
Well,
1E, but I hated it in second ed. I mean, whether or not you think the 1E weapon type adjustments are realistic or reflect the weapon is like, yeah, well, you can debate that till the cows come home, but I like it as a system because it gives it the fighters something more to think about because their weapon variety now becomes a strength because you have 4 WPs and you have something for every situation. You'll know how to breach your opponent's armor, which I think is a feature, not a bug.
It's something I've not used in 1A. It's something I would like to use at some point. I quite liked the simplification that 2E did with it in terms of weapon types versus various armors. I mean, it was in the was it in the DM's guide that I think it was for 2E. It was certainly in the version in 1E was in both Unearthed Arcana and the Player's Handbook as a standard rule, but I don't think Gygax himself used it. But the 2E version was a very simplified and very workable version of it. I think the problem with the 1A version was it was a little bit fiddly.
I think the one is actually simpler because it's just a grid on a row. You just consult. Okay, what's the base armor type that the opponent's wearing? Oh, there's your modifier. Done.
It does require referring to the grid, though. So, so I guess
It does, but you only have to do it once because it's once you've established the type of armor your opponent's wearing in the fight, then you've established it for the fight.
Well. Here's the problem: is a lot of times you're fighting opponents with multiple armor types, and you're just like,
it can happen, but it's still not. It's not a huge drawback. And I mean, our last game we played, the players were really getting into it. It's like, oh, this is handy because one of them is wearing the full plate armor from UA, which I've allowed, and he had an AC type of 0. And when they realized that enemies with clubs were something like -7 against them, it's like, oh my god, this is amazing. It's like, yeah.
The thing is, I mean, when I run 1A, certainly with my group of players, none of them had any of their weapon adjustments on their character sheets. I had a list of their THACOs written down, and I had them pretty much memorized. So, and when I was running it at the table, I was because I'd pretty much memorized their THACOs. They'd roll the d20, and I'd be able to tell them within a second whether they'd hit or not, without referring to any tables or anything like that. And
it's an extra step, but it does, I think, adds the layer that helps the fighter. And I mean, that's what the topic is about today.
Exactly.
And for myself, I would have preferred if they'd just done it very simply. And I'm, 5e did some things right. I think in certain cases, this is light armor, this is medium, this is heavy. I think, and sometimes those are really good of, like, what is it? Lamellar armor, plate armor, and a couple of others. It's like, okay, it does this. Okay, this is padded armor and leather armor. I think in some cases that helps. But when it's against every individual type, you're like, okay, what is splint mail versus banded mail versus what is plate mail? And I think that's where it sometimes gets pretty confusing in there.
Yeah.
Just to respond to Cal stuff here, I made them specific. I made specific character sheets for each of the players, and I didn't put much crunch on the character sheets, purely because it was a group of 5th edition players who I was taking back to AD&D to show them the old AD&D adventures and the way AD&D character mechanics worked in terms of shifting balance of play and all that sort of stuff. So I didn't want to put too much crunch on their sheets, so it wasn't really an option for that group.
I think it's also worth speaking to that point. If you're talking about AD&D, which of the billion character sheets are you talking about? Are you talking about the ones?
Creation,
are you talking about the ones? I know, but like there was no like. There were some official ones, but they weren't necessarily as baroque and full of information as, say, like the armory sheets.
I had those goldenrod ones with that, like they have a slot for everything you can think of. It was so unwieldy.
The armory ones, I remember having like gum-bound pad of like 50 or 100 from the armory that were really good, full of information too. But yeah, I mean, some of them were very basic.
I had the 4-page. They were that weird yellowish color where you had all the front stats, and you just kept going and going. And then what was funny was certain
character folios. I think that's what they were calling those when those came out.
I don't even. Well, I just, again, when you're in your small little group, I just bought whatever you could find in the store, and it was like, hey, this is what they have, and they had the 3-hole punch, and they were like 4. It was like the base stuff on the front. On the back, they would have this, and they had a little bit more. But yeah, it was anywhere from 2 to 4. It's like, all right. And as you got a higher level, it just wasn't enough. But then you had to add more to it. But no, the other part that I think that comes down to it is the because we're trying to talk about fighters, we're really talking about weapons and armor at this point because it's so integral to them. Is what were some of the while we talk about some character classes, what were some of the good things that came out from 2nd edition for fighters? Just
what the good stuff that fighters got from 2nd edition.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about some of this is the.
Well, a lot of what we have in 2nd edition didn't really change from 1st edition.
The core fighter was pretty much the same.
So it's not like
Yep.
These ones. sample sheets and stuff.
I think so, except mine were kind of this weird yellowish color.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
they'll
yeah,
make
that
the
would be
really
good.
late. These are the 2E ones,
those are second
Yeah,
ed. I
those
know
are-
which
those
one
are
Omenel
second
is talking about. I have the same
the
set.
goldenrod ones.
Goldenrod
Yeah.
ones, yeah.
I have some of those somewhere. I just couldn't find them.
So I think we've pretty much done second edition. How much experience did people have with third edition?
Very
I played some.
limited.
I
Yeah.
But
played
I
for about a year or changed, but I never ran it.
Yep.
I
And
mean,
it's-
my only really, I played a cleric for about 5 or 6 weeks. Well, probably 3 or 4 months in a third edition campaign, and I've played Neverwinter Nights and had a fighter type in that, and that's about all I know about third edition fighters. But what I do know about third edition is it added the dreaded feat trees and things like that, and this was, I mean, I guess to make characters, well, to introduce the dreaded build word when it came to characters, combinations of feats and optimal combinations. And from playing Neverwinter Nights, it didn't seem to make the characters any more interesting. Certainly, it made them more powerful if you optimized it properly, but it didn't make it any more interesting to
I think that's
any of you got any feelings?
I remember playing a fighter, which was a dwarf, and I played it for like 3 sessions, and that was it from my 3E experience. Oddly enough, it always felt like I don't know. You look at the feats, and it was, again, how we talked about things just being more mechanical, and I feel that to me is, while you can balance it very easily, that kind of makes characters boring, is when everything becomes purely mechanical rather than how do I want to say it, is dynamic, and we all talk about the rule of cool, things like that.
Right.
Right.
With the rule of cool being an issue, though, I think when you have the mechanical aspects there, so this is a nod in the direction of the positive elements of mechanics. Rule of cool is all good. Not everybody's as good at being cool as everybody else. So if I am this narrative player who can just dazzle and come up with amazing things to do with my character, and the DM is going, yeah, that's cool, but the guy next to me isn't that kind of a player, I have a distinct advantage in the game. And so the mechanics do put everybody on a more of an even playing field in terms. Now, granted, there's another argument for proficiency in those mechanics, like the people who were much better at character builds than others, who optimized. But I think the mechanics do help players figure out what their characters can do.
I do want to step in here because we do need to address the roots of third edition. That was in the very tail end of second edition. That was when TSR was being bought out by Wizards of the Coast, and that is where Wizards of the Coast began their introduction of, they want to depart away from what TSR made. There was going to be a third edition. It was going to be new. It was going to be different, and we had seen the preamps for that at the very tail end of second edition. Ergo, when third came out, it's not what we saw in first edition. It's not what we saw at the beginning or midway through second edition. The tail end of second, sure, but it was a departure from what we at least saw with these 2 editions, and that was intentional. They wanted the feats to be a core part because they wanted you to have options, and the feats also became a major thing within their entire business strategy because more books, more feats, more abilities, more things to buy. It was a very business oriented decision to include it in.
Yeah.
And even, sorry, go on.
I was gonna say that's evidenced in the shift that Dragon did too. I mean, Dragon Magazine became a constant stream of new articles on feats and prestige classes. So rather than all the really cool stuff that it used to have. I mean, some of that stuff is still there, but yeah.
But
I mean,
feats
two points here. I mean, first thing I am going to say is the moment I mentioned 3rd edition, chat immediately dropped down by 4 people. So it's well
Just
done,
wait till we
chat.
hit 4th edition.
That's why you're going to lose people in the panel.
I do want to keep the 3rd edition bit brief in that sense, but I think Errant Dragon's got it here right in the sense that the whole idea of the linear fighter quadratic wizard, how wizards just went boom as levels went on, and fighters grew in a linear manner. Started off really, really effective, but then just sort of got outclassed. And the feats were the effort to try and keep them interesting.
You're not meant to be playing. You're not meant to be playing a mono class really in 3rd edition. You level it up. That's a design.
That's a problem with the game. That's a problem.
No, it's not a problem. It's a design. It's a design, and that it's a problem for you.
Style of play.
It's a problem for you, but it's an actual style.
It's crap.
Literally, it's not a game for you. It's not a good introduction for 3rd edition, but we had it for so long. You got to bear in mind, we've got a major part of people who got into D&D. They got into D&D because of 3.5 and Pathfinder. Both of them are based on this, and it's not for those who enjoy the older versions.
Some of them are still playing Pathfinder because of that.
And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I've done a Pathfinder game from level 1 to 14. And it was an absolute blast, but I realized I need to go back to older games because that's where I have more fun. The point of the feats and where it comes in with the fighters is that it gave a much more tangible mechanical edge for the fighters to be standing out. Weapon focus. You didn't have, what's it called? You could have weapon focus. You could have cleave. Certain abilities now became available, and it became much more sort of branched out. Yeah, there were prerequisites and requirements for these things, but it was the sort of thing that you could now take. You could specialize. You can make your character much more mechanically enhanced in order to meet whatever character or creation that it was that you wanted out of this. And it did breed out, for the min-maxers to create their builds. There are websites where you can go and see what are the feats you want to go for, which ones are worth your time.
I'm going to bring this up, and I'm bringing another system in here, which is Forbidden Lands. Is the problem that I have with feats, and this goes off to 5th edition, was not all of them were equally useful in a major way. Whereas in Forbidden Lands, even things that seem innocuous are, in some cases, are far more important than another one. And I think that's part of the, when we talk about builds, and this is when we say, and I don't disagree with you about the design. I think that the design works out well for that. The problem, I think, in some cases is that either you get things that are so suboptimal that it actually hurts your character to take them, or like you were talking about, I guess, in one time you're talking about whether your players were min-maxing up to the point that you just decided to give them no challenges, where you effectively made it no challenges their Saxius. I remember you talking about that. You're like, I'm not going to play this arms race against all of your feet. This is what you get, and if it's just too easy, then you have to decide to pull yourself back. I think that's sometimes when we start talking about this, is you want it not to just be a purely corner case, is you want them to be, and when I say equally useful, that doesn't mean equally optimized. That's a difference in the two, but they're equally useful, which is where I think Forbidden Lands really did a fantastic job by making, and 5th edition has the same problem, where cooking may be far more important than your ability to use a shield. And it sounds,
I mean, to be fair though, it's all great to sing the praises of a game like Forbidden Lands, but oh no, this game is so awesome with 30 years of system research done before it came around. It does get to benefit from the decades of wisdom grown through other game systems, and Forbidden Lands is written like that from the core rather than trying to adapt out of an existing system. which is one of the problems that third edition had, for example, is it's trying to add stuff onto D&D.
We'll just bring it back to fighters before we get too off to a tangent. So I don't think there's much more to really be said about 3.5 feats and the fighters for that, because it really just basically boils down to this just gives the fighter more stuff that they can be awesome with, but there came caveats with that because of the game design at its core.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think that's it, and we'll skip the Red-Headed Stepchild. That is 4th edition.
Well, yeah,
I've never actually played it, so I've got nothing.
I mean,
on
I never actually played a
one
character,
session.
even in 3rd edition. I
picked up a book.
I played one session of 4th edition.
I read it and I just went, yeah, it was just weird with it just felt, well, what really bothered me with the magic users. But anyway, but I felt that by my understanding, and I'm not going to put it this way, was for 4th edition, I really did feel, well, you say MMO board. Everyone says MMO. I don't really care about the MMO. To me, it just felt like a card-based, how do I put this? It felt like a card-based war game, or skirmish game would be better rather than a full war game. And to sell miniatures. That's the way I really felt about 4E, was it was there to sell miniatures and boards and everything else. And it was great for that. But the fact that it lacked a lot of mechanics for like social aspects really just went, what are you doing with this game? Anyway, that was my feeling about that.
I think none of us are pretty much in a position where we can talk with any degree of a knowledge really about 4th edition and its mechanics and how it compares to other editions. So yeah, it's a good idea to skip past it. Aaron Dragon.
One thing to say about it, about what as far as 4th edition goes. the way it was written, where I think the way that they had structured their classes was set up really well to allow for variations of class, because they all had basically you had your your 3 root 3 or 4 like root mechanics, and then everything was just kind of added onto that. So it was a good way to build a system for balance and mechanical balance. That's what I think they had going for them, but other than that, not much.
It's definitely worth at least highlighting that 4th edition was being released during a time period when video games and online MMORPGs were the big rave. And in order for D&D to at least try and compete and reach out for a new market, that's where they try to appeal out to, because to my understanding, a lot of the books were written in the terms of like, you move X amount of squares, you do this rather than feet, yards, and what most people had come to understand from the editions previous. They were trying to encapsulate a new audience that was primarily focused on video game, games.
I'm never going to get mad at them for trying to innovate and adapt to a new environment.
I'm not mad,
because that's how you stay alive as a company.
I don't actually get mad for people for editions. All these people talk about it, and I know that Legion of Myths listen to it, and I really don't care. Why in the world are you bringing out another edition if you aren't changing mechanics up? I mean, I hate saying this, but if you aren't doing something innovative, you're just it's really like a 1.1 version or a 1.2. As much as we talk about it, is when you start looking at it, is like they're hey, we're gonna make some clarifications and stuff. I'm like, oh, okay. It doesn't really feel. It feels more like errata for 1st and 2nd edition. Then 3rd was a whole new thing.
There is
a whole new thing.
There is an advantage to coming out with a new edition, even if you're not changing, and that's to consolidate and bring together all of the weirdness that occurred as your previous edition expanded. You kind of like bring it back in, and then you kind of make it clean and neat, and you bring the language consistent. And I mean, you could look at AD&D and see how absolutely nuts you could get with all of the little, this mechanic exists only for this one special ability that we came up with in this article of Dragon, or this D&D module.
Well, and I think that was, you and I don't know if anyone else was, you and I know a lot about the Dragon magazine, how they kept bringing stuff out.
Yep.
And that was kind of the test bed for it. But I enjoyed it because it was not canon. You could add or subtract whatever you felt like in there very easily.
Yeah. And
but
those of us who had access to them played very
Sure.
different games than
yes,
people who didn't.
exactly.
So
Anyway, now
so
fifth
moving on.
edition.
My
I-
fighters were really cool because of Dragon.
Now,
Bows
moving
up
on.
for strength.
I'm a little worried now because we, in terms of the number of people in chat, we're bouncing between 27 and 29, which is more than we've ever had on a Wednesday stream, and I'm a bit worried about what's going to happen when I mention fifth edition. Because I know there were people who were going to go "Boo, fifth edition" and run away, but we have to talk about it. We do have to talk about it. So I have played quite a lot of fifth edition, and I have butchered my own variant of it, and I prefer the way my version runs to rules as written fifth edition. In fact, I will never run rules as written fifth edition again. I'd rather play AD&D, to be honest. I'll say I think you all know that. Any version of AD&D, OSE, basic, whatever, I'd rather play that sort. But fifth edition, you were saying about a new edition wanting to bring in parts of other editions to refocus everything, and they attempted that with fifth edition.
Yeah.
I think initially, when you just had the starter set and the player's handbook, I think they got it okay. But then obviously other things have happened. But with the fighters in fifth edition, because taking us back to fighters, we were presented with very much with the standard fighter, the traditional fighter, the champion, the more tactical, the more advanced fighter, bringing in the type of options we were talking about from second edition players' options and things like that in the form of the battle master. And then you had the Eldritch Knight, which was the
Fighter mage.
The fighter mage. Yeah. And they were three core fighters from the player's handbook. And the champion fighter does feel like a traditional fighter. Yes, it's a very simple class, a very basic class, and it is an effective class, but it requires significant input in terms of personality from the player in order to make it interesting, because mechanically it's not very interesting. I will say that now.
One of the nice things
job.
they did was combats was a fighting style in fifth edition. I really like that
Mhm.
because it allowed a mechanic for the ways that people always envision their characters fighting. I want to
Didn't
fight
they-
with two swords
Wait,
All right,
did they have
cool.
that in second edition as well?
in combat and tactics,
No,
and
no,
I
no,
think
no,
in
no,
some
no,
of the
I mean the
early
fighter
specialization rules maybe too. But
No, in the Fire's Handbook, they had like sword and shield. They had a couple. Of
They
the
did,
basic-
yes.
They did.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, not in the core rules though.
Oh,
It was in the
but
expansions.
yes,
Yeah,
But-
fighting styles.
But
Yeah,
fighting
that's there.
styles is core in fifth edition, and it's pretty simple. You know, you've got I think what 4 different fighting styles. So
yeah. Then they started adding a couple more. Now I think they've included maneuvers, and now they're doing like barehanded. At the point, some people are complaining that fires were out doing monks. It's one of those that I but there's so many in there with feet, with the polearm master and things like that. But I have nothing against the basic fifth edition. It's when I think that the problem really comes down to, and this happens to every edition. Actually, I didn't feel this so much for first edition, but really for second edition, where they just keep adding more and more stuff that if you have, and now that they've aimed the book to players, which very much second edition did too with their, fighter's handbook, which was aimed at players, is now you get it kind of like, well, I'm not playing your game if you're not going to do this. And while all of us,
Bye.
well, it's very easy for us to say bye if we have enough players, but it was awfully hard when you're trying to scratch together 4 or 5 players, and now you lose 2 of them because you aren't going to use their. You're like, so I understand where that can cause some real headaches for that. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that, I mean, if I'm understanding your argument here, it's basically bloat that you're picking at. Am I understanding your point right?
Yes, and I know that's what's going in there, and I'm not saying everything is bad about, but I think that the first, I'm going to say, what was it, the first, right up until about Tasha's, I thought that fifth edition actually did a pretty good job of keeping everything together and giving some expansion without it really going
No,
where
I
you
do.
feel like you're losing some of the game or some of
I
the.
do agree because aside from a couple of duplicates, I mean, I've got the Player's Handbook, Senator's Guide, and the DMG, and then its modules thereafter. Like that's the core ones for me. You know, that's really what I would go for. But so, like from what I'm gathering, from Tasha's Cauldron and some of the others that's come out later on, it just got a bit funky. But I think if you just pick, the core three and maybe one expansion for fifth edition in terms of like class expansion,
Yeah,
you're pretty much sorted as far as I can tell. Like you don't like all the other ones, Volo's Guide and so on. They're nice, they're not required. Like the core books, you're good. Like for your fighter, you're solid. Even if we're going in dipping our toes into now, you want to be the ranger. Well, the ranger definitely got the short end of the stick in fifth edition because there really weren't that much interest for them on that. But it then got picked up in Xanathars, which is brilliant. Again, fighters got a lot more interesting things that you could then do, like in Xanathar. I mean, I'll use my Curse of Strahd game. One of the players really likes Oriental settings. So much so that he really, really, really wanted to be a samurai. And we based his entire character, which was basically sorcerer fighter, on the idea that he was a samurai. And when he finally reached, I think it was like third or fourth level in fighter, he took the samurai archetype. He didn't really read up on the samurai rules, but he likes the fact he's officially now a samurai. And I'm planning on in the next campaign, the big thing for him is that he's now become a Ronin. He can regain his honor by not being a Ronin, but he can become the master, and then he can acquire his own samurais that can now come to him. And then that's the players loving that. He's loving the fact that he's considered to be noble. He's considered to be a knight. He's got the Bushido code that he's got to follow. These are cool things for him that the core books have provided for him as a guideline to use. But the real thing that sold him was the aesthetic.
Sure. I those are, like I said, is I look forward in some things, and there's some things that bug me about fifth edition, but I can say that about every game. There is no such thing as a perfect game. There's always
the champion archetype can give you a lot of leeway. It's you can turn it into anything, any class, as you say.
I mean, the Battle Master is super flexible. I mean,
I really wish the champion and Battle Master had just been core fighter, that they include all of that aspect. But I understand why that. But the problem that you have is now, and I do feel that they did a better balancing job between classes at the for fifth edition than they had done in some of the previous stuff. What are we looking at now? Is a ranger, a fighter, and a barbarian in fifth edition really considered a fighter class anymore?
Not really.
I don't think so. And
go on.
My biggest issue with playing fighters in fifth edition is combat has more and more and more become a matter of sacks of hit points up against each other. Characters are hitting each other, causing damage with so much regularity that I find it quite dull. I liked older editions where you missed more often, and other character classes, it meant something, and other character classes missed more often than fighters. Yes, I've already mentioned how weapon specialization made it go a bit too wonky, and fighters could get much too big pluses. But from my experience of playing fifth edition, a fighter is just simply a constant damage dealer almost every round, and it doesn't feel all that interesting to me. I know there's lots of other options. I mean, I'm just thinking in a mechanical sense. I know it's in terms of role play and creating different themes on your character. Yes, the fighter is still very flexible in that sense, but in a combat sense, just rolling dice and having most foes sort of like a 70% chance of hitting them and just dealing your standard damage most rounds isn't very interesting. That's where the champion falls down for me. Yes, it feels like a sack of hit points, and like a lot of the creatures do as well. But the battle master's more interesting.
Well, I need to jump in and highlight what Elf said.
Mhm.
You know, with a new edition comes out the possibility of consolidating, bringing out things and so forth. One of the things that Wizards of the Coast really learned from third edition is the fact that people were getting bored of high armor class, high hit point monsters. That was too much. You know, you would rarely hit, and when you did hit, you would have to use cheese things and so on. So that's why you saw in 5th edition the armor classes of a lot of monsters drop like a rock. I mean, I was offended when I looked at a Strahd in 5th edition and saw he only had 16 AC. I was like, that is not respectable. I will not have that vampire run around with 16 AC and be hit left, right, and center. He will look like an utter wuss. So I immediately changed that. But the core thing was that they found Wizards of the Coast have found players like hitting the enemies. So they usually just upped the HP a little bit, made the armor class a little bit lower to give that again that sensation of oh, I hit it, I have accomplished something every turn to acquire that. So yes, they made that the battle a little bit more durable to also prevent the monsters just being down in one round, but because that's not anything that any dungeon master wants. But that was a mechanical and a decision that they made consciously when they were designing the monsters.
Yeah, in game design, game theory concept, it's much more satisfying to swing and do something than swing and not.
Except that when you're doing something, the bloat of hit points is so high that you might as well not have hit in some cases.
Yeah, but
I did 20 damage.
Their
It has
target
500
audience,
hit points.
their target audience though is going to be super used to just chipping away at video game bad guys, and that's not a bad thing. The fact of the matter is that players have evolved different style of play. What appeals to a gamer now is not necessarily what appealed to a gamer in '79.
Yeah.
When I started playing.
I'm going to bring something up because most of us are near 50 or older. I don't know about Saxius there, but most of us are right around that time frame. And we have forgotten in some cases what it felt like to be playing 40 years ago, which was
Saxius
as a kid.
is young enough to be my son.
Oh,
And Elfbait's son.
but I remember as a kid.
Or yours and my
Biologically.
son.
I have
Our
questions.
beautiful
Dad,
boy. It's our
Dad.
beautiful boy.
Dad, what's going on?
Well,
Omanel's trying to make a point, Dad. Let's let him speak.
Yeah, so,
Back in the kitchen, Omanel, make me a sandwich.
well, you're lactose intolerant. No, anyway.
No, I'm not. Make me a sandwich.
I am.
Make your point.
That's fine. You buy the goods, I'll make you the sandwich. Anyway, the whole thing was, as kids, I like to hit a lot too. But I think in retrospect, because I know that Sean and I have talked about a dragon, which is absolutely terrifying, in basic, has 37 hit points? And the breath weapon does it in there. And we were talking, if you do a two-handed sword, that's 1d10 plus damage. Plus, you probably have a +1 or +2 sword, to be fair. You could take out a dragon in 2 or 3
hits. Yeah.
Very, very quickly if everything, the party could get through it. Whereas, and this is where 2nd edition, which we haven't mentioned as much, started getting up to 200 hit points. Or they did this, and it just doesn't seem the damage has scaled as much as it did before, which is I know where Eli and I were arguing about is how long do we like combats to go? I'm okay with missing as long as the creature goes down in the same number of rounds. I mean that sounds odd, but that's the way that I feel is okay. If you put a low armor class and you put high hit points, that's okay, but it needs to be balanced out there. But like the weapon damages have not really changed between 1st edition and 5th edition. Which I think is sometimes the negative aspect there. Now, sometimes you can depending on what level you are, you can really go up there. But I think that if you're going to increase the hit points, and you need a factor of like how long do you want a combat to last, and I think that that's one of the things that comes into it, because we all know that I don't know how you guys were, but when I was a kid, it was a two-handed sword all the way, because I like that 3d6 damage plus plus 6 or 8 damage when I hit. And to be fair, if you were a 10th level fighter, you could crit most armor classes pretty regularly. That wasn't that unusual. It's usually at the low levels where you're missing a lot. But that's what I'm looking at here. So I'm not sure if you're missing that often actually at the 8th and 10th levels, unless you're really getting some high negative armor classes.
But you got to earn those levels. I mean, it's a much
Yes.
slower grind to 10th level in first ed
Yeah.
than it is in
Sure.
5th ed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
With
But
5th edition, I would
again-
say my one of my biggest complaints is that and it's the same complaint, for example, that I have with the newer editions of the Star Wars RPG as opposed to the older version of the Star Wars RPG. I don't feel like I'm ever able to play the young fighter just off the farm or just leaving the city, or the down and outer who's going to tackle a dungeon. By the time I'm hitting the game, I am already a hero. And
Again,
that is a style of play.
Yeah.
And I accept that and I acknowledge that. But I like different kinds of pizza. I like different kinds of chicken. And they're not necessarily, neither one's better or worse. Sometimes I want the one and sometimes I want the other, which is why I've kind of gotten over like this edition bad, this edition good. They're all just different.
it's a different flavor.
Game.
But it's the same. It's just a complete side tangent, but it's one of the funniest things I've seen in my Pathfinder campaign, when I threw out an NPC fighter who approached the group and basically went, "I see you're earning a lot of money from doing these things. I would like to come along with you." And the group thought, "Oh, sweet, henchman. We can just give him random things to do." And then they learned, no, he's actually a fighter. He was a veteran of the Goblin skirmishes, but that's why I could justify him having a few levels. But the big reason for why he was going out traveling is because his daughter was due to be married. He needed money for a dowry. He couldn't get enough money as a guard. Ergo, he was there with them. I have never seen a group latch on to an NPC and go, "You will survive. We will acquire all the diamonds in the world to keep you alive, and you will walk down that aisle." That was something that the players just they weren't ready for, that kind of background coming from an NPC, which gave them a different form of investment. But that was just a different way to portray a fighter. He wasn't young. He was old. He was old and experienced, but experienced in a very specific thing. And allowed the group to at least turn around and go like, "Well, you are from this area. Give us some insights. You have been in the army. How did you combat, these creatures?" And it was a way for the players to sort of, evolve outward.
I'm going to look at what Squirrel Hermit did. No, weapon damage. Really, what it comes down to is the hitting time. Again, how long does your combat last? That's what it really comes down to. If you're giving massive increases of hit points, even if you're hitting more often, if the same percentage is less that you're actually doing of overall health per round, the combats are lasting longer. And that's what I going through there. So that's the other part was for dragons, and we'll get first and second edition, was when they do their breath weapon, it's dependent on their current hit points, not their total hit points. As you damage the dragon, his breath weapon becomes weaker and weaker. So it really does encourage you to whittle down those hit points in the first round or two as much as possible, because doing even 37 points of damage on the breath weapon basically TPKs a party. If they don't make
I
their
forget
save.
which. There was a difference there between basic D&D and AD&D in that one of them, the dragon did its current hit points.
Yeah,
And
in
the other
basic
one-
it does its current, whereas in AD&D it does its total.
It does its maximum. It does its maximum every
Does
time.
it,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
was that one of the things they added in later during the Dragonlance era?
I think they clarified it.
Because I thought that they did both, and then during Dragonlance they changed it where it could start splitting the damage so it doesn't have to do the full breath weapon only 3 times a day, and there's some different rules in there.
Yeah, I don't have my my monster manual in front of me, but I'm pretty sure it just. I mean, I interpret it as for AD&D, it does its hit points in damage, not current. Whereas in basic, it specifically states current hit points, like the word is in there. So.
I mean, Squirrel Hermit's point there. We were talking about hit points. Squirrel Hermit's point is that hit points are meant to be abstract. A hit isn't necessarily you stab it; it's that you weaken it in some way. So. Yeah, you can certainly frame it that every creature needs 1 hit to go down, but all the previous hits on some creatures are just slowly weakening it, taking away its ability to avoid damage. But yeah, that's just talking about sort of combat mechanics. But anyway, I think we've been through all the versions of D&D, and I think it's time to branch out and start talking about other games and how fighters are dealt with in other games. And I know Omanal really wants to talk about DCC.
No. Hold it. What about the fighter variants? You said you were going to get back to those before we start switching.
You've waited so patiently for this. Wow. And I have to agree here. As the lawful evil advocate of this entire group, my client has a right to be discussing at least 3 of the 4 variants that there are.
Okay, so we're going to wait for DCC and other games like that. And we're going to go with fighter variants. Yes. Okay. We're going to have to skim over these a little bit because obviously we could do entire streams on how the Ranger's been dealt with over the years and how the Paladin's been dealt with over the years.
You mean how the Ranger's been bent over and violated?
No. What I'm referring to is on how it applies to fighters in particular. How does the Ranger, which I know I mentioned a little bit before, the Ranger and the Paladin and the Cavalier and the Barbarian. Really, if you look at the first basic edition, really the first, I'm going to refer to basic with the fighting man, which you could be any of those things for the most part without having any mechanical. You want to be a barbarian? Fine. You're a barbarian. You want to be a knight? Fine, you're a knight. You're this, you're over here. Now, once they started adding in Ranger and Paladin, they had to put in some of those negatives of that you always have to be good, which I also think was some of the idea of that he was getting tired of all the evil characters in there. But
I think it also helped enforce the rarity, just like the extreme attribute requirements, because not everybody wants to play a lawful good character, and so you really had to, because all of AD&D is written to create a certain world. The rules of D&D inform the setting of AD&D very, very, very specifically. I mean, that's why elves are not elves. And demi-humans have limits. That's all built in there. And so, the fighter variants were trickier and a little bit more niche in as far as like the things they could do to make them rare. And
and that's where the problem for me, where Unearthed Arcana made its big faux pas with Method 5 for creating ability scores. It allowed players to choose those rare classes from the get-go.
And it gave you such a rolling system that your stats would also be almost guaranteed 18s.
Oh yeah, it was ridiculous. It was ridiculous. But
we always played whatever character we wanted to, anyways. I don't think they accomplished anything with making limits.
And I think some of that is, when we're talking about this, I don't think that we really did the way that Gygax was playing.
Nobody did, not even him.
Well, no. I mean, where he had the what was it? I guess what they call it, Adventures Guild, where they had a rotating group of players every night where he could go over and refine some things. When he was talking about that, whereas we had our friends that were 4 to 6 kids, and that was it. Those were the same people we played with every game. So it was a bit different than having people rotate in and out, which gave some of that other aspects to it. I think that there was that, and they probably also, the DM probably had all their characters in there. Like, nope, you can't do this. You're going to roll it in front of me. You're going to do this, even though he didn't say it. And Gygax left by Unearthed Arcana, hadn't he?
Leaving is kind of being nice. I don't think he really left of his own accord. He was shown the door.
He was left because they turned it upside down, opened the door, and gravity did the rest of the work. He was technically leaving through absolute brute.
They exiled him to the frontier and then cut him free after the fact.
So he was upgraded to a ranger.
And speaking of which, and I know that because we had talked about Dragon Magazine, I think part of the problem that they had in first edition was that because the fighters couldn't really separate themselves as much, we got this massive buildup of other weird fighter variants. The Archer, the Duelist. Eli, you can probably remember more than I can in some of these too. Are we
talking about AD&D or second edition or what?
Well, what yeah.
All right. Okay. I mentioned this recently, and this was actually I wrote a little essay somewhere about it, but to the folks who think that D&D is some sort of static, only one way, by issue 3 of Dragon Magazine, they had already included over 6 new character classes. Issue 3 itself has 6, and it references several from the previous 2 issues. So the idea that D&D was like one thing and it was never going to grow. Yeah, new classes are all over the place.
well, Eli, if I remember correctly, is third Dragon Magazine 3 came out before Advanced Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah. I mean,
but the cores were still there, and not to mention some of those character classes. Just to how serious D&D was. One of the character classes was the Idiot.
Oh well.
I kid you not. And Geek, go look at number 3. When you have a chance.
I'm planning videos on those. Thank you.
Wait a minute. But the politician and the bureaucrat, which were not in the joke editions. They did have the joke editions as well with the job.
Oh yeah, the Idiot wasn't into the joke edition either. It was written humorously, and there's a big preamble at the beginning, like, careful using these in your game, they might fuck it up.
But I bet it's one of those things that, and I'm gonna bring up Palladium a little bit because we are talking. It was one of those things that also caused this up to the point of, are you really adding anything to this by creating all these different character classes rather than just putting some of this in for the fighter? Which is kind of what I wish they had done, is they had gone over it, which is where I do think that 5th edition has done a good job in certain ways. I'm not always agreeing with what they've done, but the idea of that the subclass allows you to act like you're in this specialty area.
I will have to lean in here and ask my client if he has had enough time to discuss the matters that he has been entitled to.
Oh, wait. Let's not forget the Bushi and the Samurai and Oriental Adventures while we're on 1st edition as being other character classes of really making the fighter feel like it was vastly underpowered, and the only reason I felt that they had it was just for demi-humans to have something that could be in there. Yeah, well, I agree with you.
I think Mahort makes a good point here. I haven't read them yet. I'm going to come around to that, but yes, I think in a lot of the senses, from what I've heard of them, the character classes were very much there to give a bit of inspiration to DMs more than anything.
Yes,
bit of fun. Yeah.
All right. I think with that, we're all right to move on.
Sure.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Anyhow, what we were going to, the impact of Rangers and Paladins on the fighter, ignoring the fact that obviously you had to qualify for those classes. Ranger wasn't that hard to qualify for, 2 13s, 2 14s. But what made it a little more difficult was the fact that in AD&D, those 13s and 14s had to be on Strength, Intelligence, Wisdom, and Constitution. That was changed for 2nd edition. So it was very unlikely, and thus a little bit odd to me, that a Ranger would have a Dexterity bonus, when I would have thought Dexterity would have been... If you look, the Ranger was based on Aragorn, who was a dexterous individual, and it was a little bit odd
at mystical abilities because the Dunedain thing.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. How many times did Aragorn use a bow?
A couple.
But he had one.
Well, no, but
Well, at
And
the same
clearly it
time-
means something.
At the very same time, wasn't Legolas also classified as a ranger due to him being a part of the Elven, well, not rangers as like the Dane, but the scouts of the. God, I keep on forgetting what the forest is called. The Mirkwood.
Mirkwood.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
yes, yeah, but didn't they already have a +1 to longsword and bow?
The longbows, yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
to hit.
But
Right.
I mean, the range. We have to do this fairly quickly because I do want to get in other.
No.
other-
I
other
think we can
systems.
gloss over them. We've had what we needed to. Move on to the systems. Move on.
Let's
As the
go to
lawyer,
systems, let's go to systems.
exactly. We've done what we needed.
I think we can have a stream on at a later date on paladins and rangers.
Yeah, I prefer
Well,
that.
I-
Really.
Well, I'm just going to say this much: is if you had anything else, is why would a player, other than the alignment restrictions, play a fighter? I think that's where from a design standpoint, if you're going to put in a class, and I understand they had they did the prestige classes, but even the Bushi, which was your basic fighter under Oriental Adventures, outclassed your fighter by a significant amount.
Honestly, I never found that to be an issue. The people strive. Like I've got 2 paladins in my current AD&D group, and 1 ranger and 1 fighter, but the same people who play the paladins will just as regularly play a fighter. So it's one of those things that it's like superior mechanically, but that doesn't necessarily mean somebody's going to automatically default to it.
Yeah, I think the fighter is a good, going back to fighter is a good one to be flexible in your imagination and creativity. And I've seen a couple of comments, I think in the comments about if you want to play, you want to do a 2-handed fighting, maybe just play a ranger. Well, yeah, you could do that, but maybe I don't want all the rest of the crap that comes with a ranger.
No.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, there are restrictions, and
it could be that and so those options, those variations that come out in later mechanics, when we get to fighting styles and all that, allow you to have that fighter who's a little bit more interesting and a little bit more customized to your imagination, but also allows you to play it that way, not just imagine it that way.
Something that opened my eyes to that when I was younger was, do you remember the Rogues Gallery that came out for 1st edition, and those example characters that were at the back that were created by the players in the original campaigns with all the names of the players on them, and there were a number of very different fighter ideas amongst those. There was one in particular who didn't wear armor. He was a he had a very, very light weapon. And I remember looking at him as a kid thinking, how would he survive? Because I played it in a very simple manner when I was 12 or 13.
Yeah, but that guy's player is probably going, yes, and I want to bounce off the wall and swing from the chandelier. And Gary's going, yeah, roll me a die.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And those sort of things I mean, looking back at it now, I say, yeah, those sort of things are in there to open up these ideas for people, to give you an idea of how classes can be different, how a simple class can be different, applied in a different way across different characters.
Yeah, I mean, I remember being blown away by looking through those illustrations and the characters in the Rogues Gallery. I'm like, wait a minute, some guy was playing a lizard man, some guy was playing a centaur, and that was totally normal back then because that's the thing they did. Although in one of those cases they were reincarnated as a lizard man, or a centaur, I can't remember, but it just speaks to the fact that variety and all of that has always been there and always been the intention of the game.
Didn't they have in the Dragon magazines where you could play the humanoid monster races?
Yes, the humanoid, the complete humanoids.
Well, that was in 2nd edition, had a book for it, but even earlier on, they had articles on playing in Dragon. There were articles on playing orcs and playing, and a lot of the ecology articles on some of the humanoid races would include tips on how to play them as a PC and stuff.
So, I love those ecology articles. Anyway.
Although they were always cagey, and I felt like they were always just doing this kind of like almost. This is the Dragon magazine disclaimer. This is an NPC character class. No.
Oh yeah.
No, it's not. We're all playing anti-paladins, and we're all playing.
Well, if it was an NPC character class, why did you have to have experience points for it, right?
Anyways,
Anyway,
let's jump
I can
back
see
on
Saxius.
to-
Saxius is
I-
Saxius to get
I
his
am-
whip out.
I know.
I'm sorry, gents. Get back in. Get back in.
Okay.
So we have to talk about all the systems. John, please, for the love of God, pick a system.
Right, and Omanal. I know you want to talk about DCC and the mighty deed of arms that fighters can use in that. I've not played a fighter in DCC, but I've been in a group when one is being played, and I'm not sure if everyone in chat or here knows how the mechanics work. So give us a run through, Omanal.
So you have the fighters, instead of having a fixed number that they add, they have a variable die that they roll. And if you roll a 3 or above, you get what's called a mighty deed of arms. You specify what you want to do, and if you roll a 3 or above, you can do it. If not, you just hit, but you don't necessarily do the deed. You can hit. But that was one of the things that I kind of liked, because we're talking about bouncing off the walls and everything. And the reason I mentioned that is it's such an easy mechanic to put into your OSR or AD&D game without slowing it down. That's one of the main reasons I've liked it. But I like the fact that, when we talk about the combat tactics and things, by having it in there, sometimes it gives players ideas of what they can do. And I like that. You're going to blind the Cyclops. You're going to do this. Or when we talk about the weapons, what I like about it is that since it is not necessarily we don't have to do all the mechanics, and you have to go look up in the book. You can look up, it's like 4 pages, but you can basically brief through it and says, yeah, you know what? Your axe should be able to catch that edge of the shield and bring it down. Yes, that works. That's what I kind of like. Is it's
And as you
it
say,
gives you a mechanic.
it simply roll it. You roll. You just roll the D4, don't you? And if you get a 3 or a 4, you're able to do it. If you get a 1 or a 2, it doesn't happen.
Well, it's first edition. At first level, it's a D3. By the time that you get up to 10th level, which admittedly in DCC is like godlike,
okay,
you're rolling a D10 plus a D4, and so your odds for doing a heroic deed is about every turn and doing like the most.
What's the target number on that? I mean, are you rolling towards a target number or
3? Well, it depends on what effect you want, but let's say for blinding, you want at least a 3. By the time you're at 7, you're plucking people's eyes out.
So there is something you still have to reference on. It's not because your earlier description is like you just roll a die and then you made it sound like you tell the DM what you want to do.
Well.
So there's still a reference chart.
Well, there is. It is in there. It gives you kind of a reference chart, but as a DM, do I really care if you blind the guy permanently or not? If you're going to kill him in 2 rounds, probably not.
So it gives you more of a list of examples.
Yes,
and that's fair because the old face rip Marvel game would give you examples of what certain levels constitute. And as much crap as I gave you in our discussion about that mechanic,
sure,
AD&D Eli would have totally put that into his game. I would have completely ripped that into my game and just plugged that in. I'm like, all right, this is awesome.
And that's why I've really liked it. I know that there was like, oh, you just like DCC. Look, the magic system is a mess. In some ways I like it. Otherwise, it's like, if I can have a computer do it in the background, we're cool. But if I have to do it manually, you're rolling on possibly up to 5 different charts. Maybe I'm off, but you're rolling at least 3 or 4 different charts in some of the magic.
That's what kept me away from that game. I mean, when I cast a spell, I don't want to hope it does what I wanted it to do.
But that's where we went into it. But I said I want simple. We were talking about we want fast, simple mechanics. And again, is the deed die I think gives a lot, because the player, it gives an idea of what the player could do, but it doesn't limit them on what they can do.
I think the deed die would be a good replacement for crits, because I find that crits in any version of criticals, unless you play it with like max damage, they always just kind of end up falling flat. Speaking of fighters and hitting things all the time and hoping they get crits. Because also crits and fumbles are statistically working kind of against fighters because they're rolling more D20s than anybody.
In a D20 base game,
but so the feats or not the deeds die is a good way of allowing a fighter to benefit from having that critical effect, but still add some style to it. It's gonna be
I mean,
fun.
actually, I didn't know how, that the dice you use got better as time went on, because I think we played to level 2 in that game. So we were all our fighter was rolling small dice. I didn't know what he was rolling, but I just knew we had to get a 3, and he didn't.
And the dwarf
Get
gets
it
it
all
too.
the
To be
time.
fair, the dwarf gets it too, but not quite as much. But the the dwarf gets, what is it? It says D10 plus 4, which means they're almost always doing a deed. And I think the same thing happens with the fighter, where they get theirs. They're almost always doing some heroic deed in it. Yeah. So the warrior is D10 plus 4. If you get a 3 or above, you can do all of your signature maneuvers. And then if you get a 7 or above, or in some cases 8 and above, you can do the really but that allows you to play your Errol Flynn character, on the pirate ship. I'm going to do this. And
Yeah.
you're like, okay, well, you need die. All right, go through. And that's where I think that it makes it dynamic, and it really helps the fighter become a more interesting character, which is what a lot of people want to do, is when they want to play. I don't know how you guys are. I want to be William Tell and shoot the apple off of his head. I want to be the, Zorro and put in the Z.
Yeah, and the closest you've ever got in that in D&D mechanics is, I think, 2E, and it's called shots. Or
The thing about that is, just like any other class, you have to earn it. You don't get to be that at first level. And
Absolutely, yeah.
the fighter gets to 10th level and his THAC0 drops, and you are shooting the apple off the person's head without any issue. But you're not doing it at first level.
Well, but I like the fact that DCC allows you to do a little bit of that. It does allow you to do it, but again, it gives you an idea of what you can do, and it's not. It's usually when you're getting the 7 and above, you're doing the fantastic, super.
Yeah, DCC though is, again, I keep saying it. It's a style of play, and their rules are built for that style of play. They're looking for us. They're actually going for more of a slightly more heroic than AD&D, but not quite as heroic as 5e. And then everything is incredibly cattywampus and weird, which is what keeps me out of that game. I do not like that. I understand that some old school stuff was weird. Wasn't that weird?
No. I'm only saying for fighters. I'm not including the other stuff.
I
And
know.
the other point is that all of your characters have to get to that 0 level. Is for DCC. So you've already gone through that, farm boy stage. Basically, you've at least got a little bit under your belt. But that's the reason I like that for the fighters in that aspect. It allows them not to be boring, but it doesn't necessarily. And that's what I'm trying to say, is it's not just roll, you hit, and players can always do as well. But I think it gives a mechanical thing that encourages the DM as well to allow those non-standard attacks or options. And that's the other part I like about that part, is that because there's a mechanical rule in there, the DM just doesn't necessarily say no, because they don't. So that's what I'm.
And like when we were discussing it before, I kind of argued against. I'm like, well, you can do that in any game. At the same time, I fully recognize that, and I've said so earlier in this stream. If it's in the rules, it's more likely going to get used, and it does put people on a more of an even footing. Like, all fighter players know that that's a thing, and it is a thing that they can access, and it doesn't come down to the one guy who the fighter who has read everything in fantasy and knows all the moves, versus the guy who just likes swords and sorcery and has watched a couple of movies.
Okay, so what's our next system there, you old geek?
I've just opened up because I like what Cubicle 7 did with Adventures in Middle Earth, in terms of taking the 5th edition rule set and stripping out a lot of the magic and making it feel a lot more grounded. And there were 2 fighter types in there that I'm familiar with. And this one in particular, I think sort of encapsulates what it was trying to achieve very well. And this is they call the fighter the warrior in this. And there is a knight archetype you can pick. And at 3rd level, you gain something called Sworn Defender, and you nominate a charge, someone you protect.
Isn't that system's kind of replacement for Paladin in a way, sort of?
It is a little bit, but while you are protecting your charge, you get more hit points. So if you're fighting alongside the person you are sworn to protect, you have more hit points. It shows you're fighting with more fervor. But the other bit I like about this one is you have this thing called a mark of honor as well, which is your reward for it is a cultural heirloom. And this goes back to what someone said in chat earlier about how a fighter is defined by what they have found, what they use, what equipment they have, what they've experienced. And the idea is that you gain a cultural heirloom, a special item that will define your character. And especially when you're working in sort of Tolkien's world, there's a lot to work with in terms of creating an heirloom. So I think these sort of things that tie you into the setting, they don't overpower the character, and they make the character feel. It's a chance for the player to make the character feel unique without requiring mechanics as in the way that third edition, for example, did with its feats and whatever. I like that the way they've done that. I think that's a nice way of approaching it, and the weapon master in that as well. Got various fighting styles that are generally weaker than the fighting styles in standard 5th edition. But I think they're a bit more thematic, which is to me better. I know we're not it's all down to taste, but I like what they did with that. I like what they did with the fighter to help make the fighter feel quite unique, quite to fit in with the world.
Yeah. It's interesting. I had asked you before, but it turns out they didn't, and I'm kind of sad that they didn't. I would have loved to have seen Cubicle 7 just turn that into a generic fantasy RPG.
Yeah.
With to file off the Middle Earth and just make it their own core fantasy game as a variation on 5e, because it is a great way to play 5e for those people who, like me, who don't want to have to reinvent the wheel with players who've been playing 5e for a while, but also would like to downshift the fantasy a bit.
Yes.
So Don, I'm gonna, because I know that the EO Geek did it, but I know you've done this as well. How have your new players going from 5e to OSR done?
I'm just trying to think. There's not many who are exclusive to 5e.
Okay.
So let me just think who I've got playing. So there's one guy one guy's in my 5e game, but I'm playing 5e in an OSR way, and he did require some adjustment. He didn't like the fact that I cut the hit point bloat and made everybody roll 3d6 instead of standard array. What do you mean I only get a +2? Let me see. The kid in our OSE game, he's taken to it quite well. Now he's interested in running OSE. If you follow the OSE review caps, he plays the priest. He plays the Colin Bush. He's the youngest of our players. He's
3rd level.
He's 3rd level, yeah, and he's advancing the most. He took it seriously when I said, play it like a person in danger, not like a video game avatar. And everybody else is still playing like a video game avatar, even the older players.
Well, except Onion Buns, he's still around.
He's figuring it out.
Because he runs away from half the stuff.
Yeah.
Or hides, or takes advantage.
The guy who plays Onion Buns is actually Nathaniel's father, right? So they're a father and son team.
Oh, okay.
So he's whereas Nathaniel, he's avid in learning the games. Like he runs 5th ed. I taught him to play D&D a few years back as the pandemic started, and he wanted to learn 5th ed. I showed him both books. I said, here's 5th ed. This is the current one that everybody's playing, and here's Beckme. Now, if you're buying it out of your own allowance, you can get it for $5. But alas, he went with 5th ed. But when I started the OSE game, he suddenly became intrigued, and so now he wants to run OSE for his friends. So I'm curious to see how that goes. But he's taken to it.
Okay,
I may actually get a chance to play in an OSE game. I'm kind of psyched. It does require a 30-minute drive to get to the game, but
I have to laugh as it's 30 minutes. Like, yeah, but why am I okay doing that to work, but I'm not okay doing that to a game? I don't understand.
I walk 20 feet down my stairs to go to work. So So my vision of the world is much different. I mean, 20 minutes drive is going anywhere back where I'm from.
Yeah. Well,
So it's not a huge deal.
well, no, it's just funny in how we alter ourselves for that. As you know, it's just like once you get used to it, like, I don't want to have to go too far.
I just want to quickly reply to Brian's question here. Brian, I've been trying to arrange one, and it's sort of it's getting people at the right time who are willing to be on camera and play a game in front of people. But if anyone wants to, I'm happy to run one.
Now, Brian, just so you know, Real Geek has been looking for someone that's willing to get on camera as part of his group. He just can't get enough people to do it. And that's the whole reason he hasn't done a live play.
Yeah. I've been trying to push that in the Discord on and off for a little while now. But
yeah, with my no commute and having 3 days off, I have so much time I could be gaming virtually. It's just a matter of getting the pieces to fall into place because not everybody else in my life has those things. Like, I was so psyched to get into my brother's game. I'm like, yeah, I get to play in a table game. Played one session, and then they're like, when can we get together for the next game? I'll put up a poll. I'm like, oh Lord. No. And then like we were all set for tonight, and then like 3 people had to drop out. I'm like, all right, well, we'll be playing again in a couple of months, I'm sure.
Sorry, I was going to say, over the years, I learned that if you want to keep a campaign going, you bring in guests, you rotate guest players. Because even committed players will sometimes back out. And so I basically have a 50% rule, right? And, like even the OSE game that I'm recapping, you've probably, if you watch them, you've seen there's a rotation. Our player Marcel, who was a brand new player, he hasn't been in for a while. He's missed 3 months of games. He's coming back, but it's like one of those things. He works for the post office, so when the Christmas rush hit, forget it. He had no time. So bring in guests if you have.
What my brother's trying to do. It's his shtick. I'm not the DM. It's his job.
I'm going to ask a question though. It's because we all talk about this. And you talked about the 5e variation for the One Ring. What games do you think have done fighters right? Like really made them interesting to play and just as dynamic as a lot of the other classes.
I'm going to chime in with Middle Earth here. I was going to mention it in terms of how the way other systems work, because though I mean the setting is lovely, the material is really, really lush, and it's got tons of great role-playing opportunities and descriptions in there, and it's all beautiful. The core of most role-playing games comes when you actually have a good old scrap, and MERP's critical tables are the highlight of a scrap in MERP, and the fighter gets to plunder those critical tables more than any other class. And if you play experience points in MERP by the book, it's going to be the class that advances the quickest, because you get a lot of experience points for dealing out criticals, killing creatures, doing damage, and suffering and surviving criticals. Plus, even though it's class-based, there are skills, and the fighter's main shtick is that it advances in the weapon skills, the sort of hit point related stuff, and maneuver skills the quickest. And those maneuvers and the general sort of skills that fighters also get to improve as well as they go up through the levels. They are the main source of XP. So the fighter progresses the fastest, does all the juicy stuff in combat, splits skulls and whatever. And I think in terms of playing, if I was going to play a fighter, I don't want to be playing with MERP's rules. But MERP's rules, fighting is dangerous. It is dangerous.
Eli?
Yeah.
What systems do you think have really done fighters right?
I haven't played that many other fantasy RPGs, to be honest.
I mean, over your 4 decades plus.
Yeah, I haven't played many other fantasy RPGs besides D&D.
All right.
I mean, and that's the thing. I've owned many,
Yeah.
but all my core group is like, if we were playing fantasy, we were playing D&D. If we were playing other genres, it was other systems, obviously. But I have not played a lot of fantasy RPGs. I've read some,
Yeah,
and they're good.
I mean,
But I wouldn't be able to comment on them honestly because I have not played them. I mean, a lot of them were very D&D like like Palladium, for example, very D&D like, because it's literally D&D with add-ons. There was the old Atlantis system, which is put out by the same people who originally put out Talislanta. But the Atlantis system was, again, how can I write a book to tap into the D&D market without actually writing a D&D book and getting sued?
Well,
it had like 32 classes in it, which was cool.
That's sometimes where I feel that they keep adding more and more classes to really separate the fighter out, and that's why I said I just kind of like, that's why I kind of like the DCC, was only because you can play any type of I know it says warrior, you can play any type of fighter you want. It's just really, how do you want to define them? Because you have that signature deed, it doesn't feel like one would be different than the other. Whereas, when we're talking about all these different classes of archer and everything else, it just felt like, and Palladium is the worst, I think, for that, where you're going, guys, you don't need a men-at-arms and then a mercenary and then a henchman, or whatever they are. They're all basically the same one with like 2 or 3 different skill choices. I think that sometimes where they're, I had a mentor once say it's cutting the bologna awfully thin. At a certain point, you're not really adding any more to it. You're just making it. You would just be better off having it broader and allowing players to select from what's there to differentiate themselves, rather than just creating a new class every time.
I'm a fan of lots of new classes, so I loved Unearthed Arcana when it came out.
Sure.
I never felt like it broke the game, which is what a lot of people feel, and we would drag stuff in from Dragon and like I mentioned, that Atlantis source book, which has 6 different kinds of wizard.
Well, and for me, when you start talking about some of this, is like, okay, what could I go for? I could go for games like Rogue Trader or Dark Heresy, if you want to look at a fighter stuff. There we go, Sexus. Come on, Sexus. If you're going to do this, you might as well bring the stuff in of what counts as a fighter in those games. Come on, bring it up.
Yeah, but there is so many. Like that. I think we're gonna go. I'm gonna go on for too long because I actually picked a different one to discuss.
Oh, okay. Well, go for it.
I decided that because you mentioned Warhammer as a potential, but I picked mine, which is Shadow of the Demon Lord, purely because it takes some of the things that you really like and that I really like, which is it has a simplified way of just doing weapons. You've got your weapons. They've got their things. There's not a very big list. The very big important thing is, what's the weapon made out of? Is it bone? Is it iron? Is it bronze? What's it made out of? Because that has an impact on later monsters. So it's the material that impacts. You pick you go through level 0 and hopefully survive. You then pick your starting class, warrior, what's called cleric, or priest, so on and so on. Your base 4 classes, and then as you get up to the next level, level 3, you then have a myriad of other professions or classes you take and you combine with your starting class. And as you level up, each class then gives you additional bonuses that helps you build, specialize, or branch out as you go along. So you can go from just being a simple warrior to being a warrior wizard, or even being a warrior ranger, or a warrior fighter. And then each one of them will then give you a different variation of that. And I really like that because it means, again, Shadow of the Demon Lord, you're playing up until you have 10 adventures, and then the game's over.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, there is a set deadline for this game from the very get-go. And once you hit that, that's it. End of game, new characters. And then the idea is that you're now going to try to achieve the same thing, but it's going to be a very wild outcome in comparison. So I like that. But that's also because I do like the fact that, well, Shadow of the Demon Lord appeals to my genre and taste as a DM. I don't know if I made that obvious.
I will say, like having a set level limit kind of bakes a doom clock into your campaign.
Yes, and it's funny.
Which in Shadow of the Demon Lord is very much a thing, like setting wise.
No,
so
like,
it helps enforce that.
Mechanically, the doom clock is a thing because if you fail an adventure, you actually have impacts to the world that impacts your character. It's great. Oh. Yeah, no, I'll shut up now.
I think
it's okay to get hyped. I mean, we could.
You're like a kid at Christmas there, the way you were wobbling around.
I mean, especially considering he's so mechanical. So
it's just I failure is going to have direct impact to the players, and if you don't, I remember when I ran one of the games, the simple thing was. We rolled for the random season. We started off in winter, and my first mission was these necromancers are actually going to try to make winter last for like 6 more months and completely wreck the environment. If the players failed, they would now have an eternal campaign set in winter, and that would have a big side effect.
I'm going. I mean, looking at just to do the shout out for Shadow of the Demon Lord, because I asked you, there's I believe it's on Bundle of Holding right now. If you want to get it real cheap out there, so
last thing I need is more RPG books.
I just ordered
more shelf space.
The new Wuxia game from Osprey. It's righteous blades and something blood. Damn you, Seth Korkowski, and getting me into another game.
Hey, Sean, just so you feel good, maybe for the drive-through RPG, because I've been able to get so many of them on like really cheap. I was looking at it yesterday. It's like 409 PDFs. Now, admittedly, that's not all different game systems, but there's that, and then I'm afraid to see all the others.
How was the fighter treated in every one of them?
Well,
you have 10 seconds.
Wait. It's skill based. You don't have to worry about it. It's whatever role you want to play. No,
that's fair.
Well, not all of it, but that's what the ones I like.
I'm going to come to Errant Dragon's comment here. Do we think the fighter is a badly named class? Now, I've just pulled down my player's handbook because would it have been better known as simply a warrior? Would that be because you don't think so?
I think fighter is actually a good name for it. Yep. Because regardless of what flavor they are, they're still the fighting guy. Actually, fighting man may have been the better one. It's just kind of cumbersome and dumb sounding. But
I'm going to bring this up, like you said, with the fighter. I think the fighter is a well-named class. The problem is that they started slicing it up so much that it means less. If we had just left, like I said, if we just left it as fighter, and then if we had just done the basic 4 classes, cleric, magic user, thief, fighter, and you had allowed the fighter to do what 5e has somewhat done, where you can do your subclasses from there, that would have made much more sense. The problem is once you start doing ranger and paladin as its own separate class, and then archer and then duelist and all these other things, it lost a lot of its impact.
Well, and part of the reason for that was logic. Sorry.
Go on, Sean.
I was just going to say the fighter, the paladin ranger subclass is also because they're tied to mechanical charts, the faculty charts, the saving throws. So that's why they were also bundled.
Yeah.
Right? Just for convenience and reference.
And I was going to just as a silly point. I mean, in AD&D, it has to be the fighter because I was thinking of warrior, but a warrior is a second level fighter. So
I mean,
Yeah.
honestly,
Yeah.
if you think about it, they could have done away with having a paladin in the game altogether if they would have just revised cleric and got rid of the weapon restrictions, because
or
they're pretty much the second best fighter out of the main classes. Yeah, so.
but again, that's where you start getting the fighter classes when they came out with the Player's Handbook in second edition, and then also you got the Amazon and this. But I think in some ways, I like I said, is if they had done a slightly different, and of course they're trying to sell books. If they'd done a slightly different mechanic, the fighter could have incorporated everything. You could have done one of these like I was talking. Not that everyone goes on the Discord and watches us arguing. Is whenever I said this, I would have much preferred at 5th level. Then you could go to a ranger, or you could have had these prestige classes. And then when you said, "Hey, I'm a paladin," they're like, "Holy crap, that's at least a 5th level character." Or I'm a ranger, that's at least a 5th level character. And players would have known how to play before, but it would have encouraged them to go in different branches. So now I want to go barbarian, I want to go ranger, I want to go fighter, or I want to go paladin.
But not
And
every
that's let
theme
them
or
break the
concept it comes from an advanced position.
Sure.
A paladin. There's a very good case that a paladin is, from a warrior. I mean, he's from a holy order of warriors, and he started out as some novitiate soldier and made his way up.
Yeah.
And that's fine. And rangers, there's going to be a little apprentice rangers running around. Assuming that you have to be 5th level before you can become something special. Goes back to that problem, like I was saying, what I had with the Star Wars game and with 5th edition. You're never going to be a grassroots ranger or a grassroots paladin, which is a kind of a dumb concept, but you know what I mean. You're not going to be that starting character.
And that's why one of those prestige classes was that way. It assumes you've gone through those first few levels. And actually, Dragonlance, I thought, did a very good job with that. When they got the knights, you had to get to 2nd, 3rd, or 4th level. You had to get up to those levels and then go through a quest before you could go up those paths.
Beckme did the that sort of thing. Paladin, you had to get to 9th level as a lawful fighter, and then you elected to become a paladin. Couldn't start it that way. It's an interesting way of doing it.
I think that would have really meant something, because then it would have been, I just didn't roll high stats. It would have been
right. You earned it through experience. Yeah.
Yes, and then I felt the same way with Ranger. And I think that's a good way of doing these prestige classes. The other thing is as a player, it allows you to decide if you want to go that direction because you've been playing long enough. I think sometimes things are so fast, even for 5e getting 3rd levels very quick. It's very quick.
They only have levels 1 to 3 just as a leftover. They really don't want you playing anything lower than 3.
But I mean, but because of that, the players haven't really learned what they like or where they want to go, which is one of the things they're talking about with the cleric now. But instead of feeling locked in and going, man, I don't really enjoy this, I think that it would have really helped out is by doing that is in getting up those higher levels. If you want to play a paladin by the time you hit 9th level, you want to play ranger or whatever we say 5th or 9th, whatever it is at some arbitrary high level. It takes a long time to get to. The other thing is that's a real achievement. It's not just there's only like a few paladins in the world. Anyway,
if we're talking about rebuilding systems, I mean, you could just go with the 4 core classes and just then write feats into the game at an early stage, and then everybody just customizes their base characters by what kind of feats they get.
The agony of defeat.
well, and actually, that's kind of
feats can be done in a relatively controlled way, as long as the feats are small steps.
I don't mind feats, like if the system's baked around it, like.
That's what I'm saying. If we're talking about rebuilding,
I use the feats in my 5e game. It's like I let the players choose, because it's either you're getting your stat advancement, and since I start them with 3d6, their stats are lower, or you get your feat. And I also ban them from multi-classing if they've taken feats, and vice versa. So, make the choices sort of meaningful. So yeah, I don't mind feats. But I wouldn't want to redesign AD&D or Beckme to add feats to the mix.
No, I think that's one of those things.
I think I'm with Michael Stronghold on this one, in that in terms of all these prestige classes, organic development is the key for me. And it would be nice to have that sort of flexibility so you could grow organically with your character and head down different paths, but it would need to be backed up by the fiction of the game.
Yeah, I mean, those are the things that come into it. It's again, I know that Saxius is actually, I guess you've done Dark Heresy and your feelings towards those.
Yep.
They do have, now you can probably tell it better than I can because I just have the books and read them, but I didn't feel, because that's kind of a weird thing where you get these ranks as you go up,
Yeah.
and that selects what skills you can get from there.
Yes.
So what's your feeling towards some of those that are more martial is a better phrase?
In Dark Heresy and or just 40k in general.
For the 40k system by Cubicle 7 Fantasy Flight, whatever you want to say.
Yeah, which one? Sure. So when it comes to the martial ones in the 41st games or the 40k games, a lot of it basically boils down to like you've got to basically like be aware of like the XP you earn, you've got to reinvest into your character to basically have abilities, improved stats, and so forth. And I think, especially in like if we take first edition Dark Heresy, in order for the system to show that you go from almost like a zero to hero kind of thing, you are going to have a lot of like very powerful, more like very good skills and talents and abilities locked away, so that you will only have access to them, and to show that your characters progressed and they've learned and they've improved in their skills. And then as you get higher and higher and higher up, you will now get access to certain abilities that when you combine them together, you almost see the 3.5 effect of your character suddenly becomes very powerful in what they're capable of. Because I have seen some characters who focused specifically on melee combat, they were just turning into a whirlwind of attacks. They will get 3 or 4 attacks off in a single go, and then Lord have mercy on anyone trying to attack them, because they will not only parry, they'll then immediately do a riposte to that, and they become very powerful. But you would have to survive to that point. And Warhammer does not hold its punch. Yeah, Warhammer does not hold its punches. Like you can.
It shouldn't. I mean, what's the average lifespan of an Imperial Guardsman? Like 15 seconds.
15 hours if we go
Yeah, or
by.
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's 15
15
hours.
something. It's like 15 hours after hitting their duty station.
Yes, 15 hours is the average, and you can play as a guardsman, and there are some awesome combinations in there.
Which means that those veteran guardsmen are scary fuckers.
Oh god, yes. I mean, it's back to the old saying of like, in a profession where people die young, be aware of the old man. That is the whole thing, and I would say it's similar to like in the 40k role-playing games. If you are playing a martial character, you are going to go into an area and into a system where combat is very, very deadly. It is scary, especially when you look at like they don't have criticals like, oh, you do more damage. They have criticals as in your arm is blown off. Yes, you can have it replaced with a cybernetic or a robotic arm, but you got to survive that combat first.
Let's get it right. It's 40k. They're bionics.
Sure, whatever. But you know exactly what I mean.
Exactly.
The bionics, the implants, and all of this is you can easily get it. You could have an awesome character. It's just like, oh, I've got a bionic arm. I've got an eye's been replaced, and all these cool things to really show the battle scars. But these are going to be scars you will remember your character having, been dragged out by your teammates, or in one of my more favorite of situations is someone didn't read the blast radius of a grenade and threw it into a room where there was combat happening, hoping like, oh, it'll be fine. It was not fine. I penalized the people in there because they're busy fighting. So it's like, you're not going to get a bonus to your agility. You don't get to just immediately see that there's a grenade in there because he didn't shout grenade. So now there's a grenade at your foot. You're too busy being worried about, people putting a hammer into your head. And woof, that's some lovely damage. Let's see how this goes. Oh, that's a leg gone. And yeah.
And when plasma's a thing,
Well, I was just mentioning that because it's one of those things that I know by the time that I was reading the Inquisitor book, we
Yeah.
could actually play the Inquisitor. You're
Yeah.
like, oh my God, you're almost at God level
Yeah.
of taking things out left and right. But when you start
Because
off,
Inquisitors are super scary.
well, it's not just them. They have the Psychers, and they're at like level 4 Psycher, and I mean, it's the kind of thing of
Yeah, but being a psyker is, I mean, we're going way off far afield, but being a psyker is so dangerous. Every time you just want to open, you want to like blink that third eye. You're like,
no,
the warp
I
is
mean,
like, really now?
that's the way 40K is at the beginning, or the Dark Heresies at the beginning. When we're
Yeah.
talking the Inquisitor level, it's what you've already gone through like 9 ranks or whatever. You're now demigods almost at that point.
Yeah,
So
but the warp
like,
always has something bigger.
Oh yeah. But it boils down to, if there is a role involved, you can always brick it. You can always brick a save, and even though you might have the abilities to re-roll your saves, all you have to do is just roll 100 twice. The reality will split apart. A frog tongue is going to come out, grab you, and into the warp you go. You're gone. You're dead. It doesn't matter. I don't care. This is the result. But yeah, 40K has got some really intense martial setups, and the characters who are built to be martials, oh good grief, they will excel at that. But they're not just going to excel at that, they're also going to have the commandeering, they're going to be intimidating, they're going to be a great leader, tacticians. Like, it really takes into account that you can build your character around combat, but on a multitude of different levels. Rogue Trader, the arch militant, he's not just a glorified bodyguard or a champion, he's also the commander, the general, he's the strike team leader. He's the one who's going to be standing with the people at the giant cannons of your ship and going, fire. Sorry, I'm going off on.
No.
I've been watching some 40K lore things recently, and it's just such a nasty universe. Like, to refuel the spaceships, you are going to die. It's not a question.
No.
It requires you to die.
Yeah.
I just want to dive in for Munchie here and just use the word melee in a sentence. There you go. Melee. I've used it. That's how you pronounce melee. Sorry, we're going off on a tangent in chat.
It's melee. No.
I mean,
Or what's worse is you say melee. Some people say melee.
melee with the boulet.
Speaking of fighters and subclasses, one of the most annoying things I ever had to deal with fighter subclasses is playing with a guy who insisted that the correct way to pronounce it was Paladin.
Oh God.
I'm like, no, it's Paladin, dude.
I've one of my players is like that. I've
may
been trying
have
to
seen
correct
a
him for 20
Gunfighter
years.
show that had the same name.
I don't really care at this point. If someone says melee, I'm like, okay, fine. It's not my language, and I'm not going to get into it.
There's also a player in my current 5th edition game and she's trying, but it still engages that part of my brain that we would have really taken offense back in the AD&D world. She's like, my scimitar. I'm like,
okay. As someone that took like 5 years to reel that Wendes Voss was rendezvous.
To be fair, when I was 8 and I first started playing D&D, it wasn't chaotic; it was chaotic.
Some of it is that
Charisma.
the problem is sometimes when you read, you don't know how things are pronounced. You're going to follow up, that's how you can tell if someone's
charisma is the statistic that measures how much Mexican sausage you have.
My niece, when she was 17, was prepared to die on the hill that facade was pronounced facade.
I went to a high school that's mascot was a chimera.
So chimera.
Oh my god! But even worse, they insisted on pronouncing it the French way, chimera. I'm like, you're both wrong. It's chimera because it's a freaking Greek word.
Well, and I agree with Grumpy Old Slam. We're all geeks and nerds. We know tons of words we cannot pronounce.
And then, of course, being an Imperial Guard player, I had plenty of chimeras.
Yes.
Like, I'm going to move my chimera. I'm like, no, you're not.
That'd be chimera.
Or playing fantasy battle, my wizard mounted on a chimera. No!
Oh,
So a creature that's not in the rule book, I see. Let's take these off the table.
Exactly.
well, it's but no, that's why it's just because we mentioned some of these others, but I mean, a lot of times what I have is I have skill-based systems, so you kind of build your fighter any way you want, and it's not quite the same. Forbidden Lands has some really cool options
Don't build
for the fighter.
characters.
I don't care on what you say about there.
Don't build characters.
You actually, I'm going to get you on this one because you build skill sets. So your character's building a skill set. Anyway, this I'm sorry, the skill. What
Develop is a
anyway.
Fine,
Well,
I won't build my character. I will construct him.
Oh, yes,
I will fabricate my character.
Is this my character blueprint? Is it approved?
Well. Actually, anyone that's as I'm getting older, I always send my my PC for pre-approval. And it's, look, I rolled really high. If you don't like the stats too high, just let me know. And I've got like a couple other ones. That's when I was young. I was like, no, I've got to have these with this great. It's like you just tell me what we're going to go through, and we'll go through it. But Forbidden Lands, I think, does a very good job for their martial classes, and they can be separated depending on what talents you get. And I think that's really good. But it's also interesting that I don't feel that, like you were talking about, which is basically their feats. But I don't feel they also made sure that everything was useful rather than just tacking it on. It's like, hey, this sounds cool. That's the problem that I have a lot of times with the newer feats is that they don't sit back and say, hey, how can we make sure that this feels useful and just isn't
that's how you
one
get
of those
new additions.
I
Because so I actually was discussing this with maybe it was in our argument the other day because we said so much.
I know.
Any game system, even if they don't go and add new stuff, is later inclusions in that game are going to be more powerful than earlier inclusions, just because they on the merit of becoming more familiar with the system.
I guess. Oh, speaking of which, we're going to go for words. How do you pronounce the stupid word DESMENSES or whatever? If you see it all the time written out there,
DES.
MENSES.
What was that?
Domain.
What was that, Sean?
Domain.
I see. I'm used to just domain being DOMAIN.
Domain,
So
yeah.
that's why I was just. I had never heard that until like this year and how it was actually pronounced. So I just.
Don't quote me. I think it's simply an archaic spelling,
Okay.
like jail, GAOL, right?
Oh.
Yes.
Or the.
Oh, L is taunting you there, John. Nicodemus.
Nacho Demus.
Oh yes.
The chaos god of snack foods.
Yeah.
Is it a GIF or is it a GIF?
GIF.
I say GIF.
Oh yes.
Because the G
There
stands for
we go.
graphic, right? Graphic is a hard G.
Yeah.
Yes,
I've been
indeed.
using GIF.
Because it's an acronym, and acronyms are not ruled by English.
English isn't ruled by English.
That's beside the point.
Where do we even begin with this? Because whenever I point out flaws in the English language, I've got my wife looking at me and saying, "Right, let's go through the Danish, rules and
If you're
abbreviations."
going to send me a
and
GIF, I better be tasting peanuts. But
Well, here's the other thing that I have to laugh at, which is people forget, is the English language has about twice as many words as any other language. And so, because it has that.
we just borrowed
And no
them.
consistent rules on how to pronounce them.
Yeah. Well, oh yeah. And it just steals from everywhere. I mean, it's one of those
And then
things.
you have German that never makes up any new words. It just it just adds them all
Mer-
together.
Merges them together, yeah.
Is
It's
that German or
new
Danish?
words are for
Big
those
word sausage.
loose other Europeans. We're just gonna have
I
I know.
actually, if we're going to talk about fighters, and I hope I got this right, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in German was like Teenage Mutant Fighter Turtles.
that has to do with a lot of the legalities in other countries for
Teenage Mutant
the
Hero,
use of the word
Hero
ninja.
Turtles it was, wasn't it?
Yeah, in England they couldn't use ninja at some point because it was not good for kids or something like that.
I was just going ninjas. I mean,
It's like,
come
have
on,
you
well,
seen the state of ninjas in media? There's nothing wrong with. There's nothing adult or sinister about it. Come on,
some of
they're
it, some of it-
turtles.
if anyone remembers, the English language used to put them in like little italics or whatever to show that they were a foreign word and not an English word. And the rest of the world the rest of the normal population went, screw it, we're just stealing it. Samurai is not a fighter or a warrior; it's a samurai.
And we're gonna bring
Ninjas
this. We're gonna bring this back to fighters. The
Yeah.
Palladium system, fighters in that game. Speaking of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and other strangeness, fighters were so convoluted in those games because you had your class, and then you had all your skills. So your character generation took an hour. It took 8 hours because like here's my dice rolls. And now I took physical education, and so I'm now adding to my strength, I'm adding to my endurance, and then I took fencing, so I'm adding to my dexterity, and I took wrestling. Okay, there's some more strength, and
and more hit points, SDC. Yeah.
exactly. It's like you had. I feel like nobody who ever made a Palladium character really knew what they actually had. Like you had an idea to where you started and you kind of wandered through the woods and a character came out the other side. But at that point, like I have no idea what I have.
Well, I don't know. I played Robotech mostly for that, and I remember that.
I played Riffs and made a character that combined rules from 3 different core rule books once.
No. Rift is the reason I left Palladium. But I remember seeing Legion of Myth while they're going over their year of Palladium, and I'm looking at, and even when they were interviewing Kevin Simbita, even when they're interviewing.
Oh, sorry.
No,
You said Simbita.
Well, I'm sorry, and how you're supposed to pronounce it. Anyway, the whole.
Oh no! It's not the pronunciation; it's
Okay.
the man.
Well, actually, but it was very interesting listening to it. You could tell that they just like, well, we're gonna get an archer and a ranger, and there's like 2 skill differences between the two. Why did you have these as separate classes? And that's the way that I feel really about as much when we were talking again, coming back to the D&D was I really felt that a prestige would have been better for that, and just leave. The fighting is good if you're a person that generally deals with a martial of arms, you get this, and then you can branch off from there. That's the way that, and that's why I do like just the basic classic fantasy BX. And somewhere at home I have the rule cyclopedia, but I haven't. But yeah. Sometimes I just feel that everyone wants everything perfectly, and I don't know about the newer classes under the advanced fantasy. I know Sean's been playing with those a little bit, and your feel towards them. Well, like you said, is you're only adding one at a time. What's that?
Anyway,
They're mixed bag from what I've been reading over. I like how the acrobat plays out, but
I will need to jump out here, gentlemen. It's been wonderful,
Yeah, I was gonna say.
absolutely
Right.
very
Well,
constructive.
Cheers.
Jax, appreciate you staying later than normal.
Yes, I know. I'm staying way past my bedtime now. So,
One last
gonna be
question for you, Saxius, is you've talked about getting a game going on the Discord at some point. Is it possible in the future?
it is still on the slab. Yeah, I just need to pull it out there. I'll need to check, if people want to use Roll20 or what it is. But the plan is I will take whoever is willing to go through my absolute sadism through Shadow of the Demon Lord. And
yeah, I'm up for that.
you're up for that. All right, cool. All right, I've got PDFs that I can just drop into people's inboxes if need be, just casually.
Bundle of Holding has the whole thing if you want it. We're just mentioning that so we can go a legal route, right?
I just need people to hold on to it for me. Like it's just purely it's a renting purpose. There's a time limit of 2,000 years.
I'm trying to keep everything legal here.
We're careful, but that's it. Yeah. So I'll be posting something this weekend to see who's interested. Excellent. And we will get the ball rolling for that because I'm happy to. If people's willing to sit through what I say every week, come in. Let's have fun. That's it.
All right. Have a good night.
Night,
guys.
Good night.
Bye.
Yes, actually.
So I think that in some ways it's if the GM is very flexible, fighters are fantastic. If they're really stick in the muds, fighters are probably one of the most boring classes you can play.
Well, that's true of any class, though.
Yeah, well, but I'm saying, but
I think
based on
fighters more than any other.
Yeah,
I think fighters more than any other. I think, yeah.
Yeah.
It's
It can really come down to I hit him with my sword.
Yeah,
Or
and that's
I roll. I'm gonna run up there and I'm gonna do a flurry with my sword. I'm gonna swing at the orc. Roll to hit. You hit, and DM's like, you hit. Roll damage. You're like, well, thanks.
yeah, and that's where I think I really come into it. Like Elfbait and I were arguing. I like the fact that there's, and I only use DCC for that one aspect, is it encourages both players and DMs to go that way, and that's
Somebody
what.
said the magic word, evidently, because ding.
Oh well, that was my friend.
Turkey's done.
Well, that was my friend.
It's like
with
Pee Wee
COVID.
Herman, the word of the day. Ah.
That's my friend with COVID sending me a message. So.
Oh.
he's doing okay, but he said yesterday sucked a bunch. Anyway, but no, that's all I wanted to do was really, sometimes by putting that in there, it encourages both players and DMs to incorporate that dynamic, cool aspect that really, I think anyone that's playing a basic fighter wants to play the Errol Flynn or Conan or whatever else is in there and do cool stuff. And like you said, just to swing your sword, roll damage. I feel it's a huge letdown.
I think when we finally kind of coalesced in our ideas in the argument there, we came to that discussion point of future D&D manuals, or maybe this was in another rant. I don't know, because that day that you and I were going at it, I ended up in another argument at the same time in my D&D group. So, like, but he pointed out, actually it wasn't you, it was the other guy, that all of this, like how to play a fighter like in an interesting way, or the how to run a game, all of that, it seems to be gone from RPGs, at least D&D nowadays. You remember back, I told him, like, you ever want to read a really good why and how of the game, read the old AD&D DMG. I mean, when I talk about getting into the deep lore of why the game is and how it is, or even, the old BX sets with their examples of play and, explaining why things are being done. But in the same way, at the same time, with those examples of play, they're written with the, faux players in that example playing their characters. And I think reading through all the rules and digesting the mechanics of the game, there's often not a lot said for the role playing of the game. They'll tell you that what role playing is, but they don't spend a lot of time telling you how to do it or how it's okay to do it. So, and talking about how fighters can be really boring if the DM and the player are either side of that equation is just kind of like, I swing my sword, or you hit the orc. That's something I think that could be baked into some games, I think, a little bit better. And that's where mechanics like DCC's feats, not the feats, but the deeds die and stuff comes in there. Yeah.
Well, and I want to bring up one other part in there, and this is why I don't want to argue about it, but having really short combats, it's easy to come up with something unique if you get 5 rounds worth, maybe up to maybe 5 or 10 attacks, you can come up with something original. If it starts coming down to, once you start getting past that, it starts really becoming, I swing my sword, or I do this. And
I say, the key there is you don't have to do it every attack. You can just use it once or twice a combat to add something memorable to the combat, but you don't need to be coming up with something imaginative every single attack. In fact, it's almost impossible to come up with something new every time.
I always I like to try as a DM, try to throw in some kind of narrative when a player rolls, even if he misses. I'd be like, all right, even if it's just a quick sentence, like, if the roll was close to the armor class but didn't beat him, like, and you connect, but your blade glances off of his armor or off of its scales, something. And yes, I may say that 3 or 4 times, or I'll rephrase it like, you're fighting hard, but you just can't seem to get through, kind of a thing,
Yeah.
I think that keeps it from being blah, and that helps with the fighters. And also, but you have to be open and receptive to your fighter. When your fighter says, want to go and parkour off the wall and kind of try and do that, Brad Pitt in Troy leap stab. I'm like, all right, cool, roll to hit. We're not gonna, well, and as long as they're not asking for like advance, and even if they are asking for some sort of, can I get a bonus because I'm avoiding his shield or whatever. If you're gonna be that creative, maybe, it's not gonna be a constant rule, but. Yeah, if I'm a DM worth my salt, I'm going to sit there and say, okay, if you can describe to me how your character is legitimately getting around that guy's shield in a way that he's not going to expect, because nobody's going to expect you to do the parkour Brad Pitt downward stab, because that's just something people don't actually do, except for in fantasy movies. Sure.
Well, and that's why that was the only reason I was mentioning that I like the DCC is because it actively encourages those kinds of thoughts. But again, short combats allows it to keep it fresh, and you don't go through and it's just like swing my sword, swing my sword, swing my sword. As you try and go through it, and I think that's part of the low.
I think AD&D combat with more attacks that miss help you keep the hits fresh. Mm-hmm. It's that's one of the things that I feel. I mentioned I do find 5th edition combat hitting so frequently quite bland, because you do feel as though you're chipping away at hit points, and it is difficult to keep it fresh, to keep any descriptions on point. But it's past midnight. It is the pumpkin hour, so okay. I have work tomorrow, as I always do on a Thursday. So I'm just gonna. I did actually say earlier on in chat for people to shill their channels, and Colstaff has mentioned that his channel has all of the D&D cartoon episodes on it. So if you want to catch up on those 80s cartoons, head on over to Colstaff's channel. Squirrel Hermit has a channel in which he does. I haven't seen much from Squirrel Hermit recently. I don't think he's made any videos recently. Maybe.
Well, Mage's Musings just came out with one on Saturday.
He did, yes.
Season finale.
Mage's Musings is here. He can shill his own channel. He's here. He doesn't need me to shill it for him. Yeah. So, Sean, would you like to have a quick shill for your channel?
I will. It's my worst skill, self-promotion. But yes, if I think most of the people here are already a part of, already subscribed. Yeah, but if you enjoy puppets and D&D silliness and game recaps and what was the other thing? And the occasional bout of theory crafting, yeah, come up, check out Mage's Musings. I'm going to be off for a couple of weeks while I just sort of figure stuff out. But I had a proper season finale.
I will add to that an incredible ability at storytelling.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'll take it.
Oh,
thank you.
Shadow and Son as well. Shadow's in chat.
Oh, Shadow's here. Yeah.
Yes, he's got.
You just slip in time to shill his channel.
He's been here for a while.
Good one, Shadow.
He tuned in a while back. I saw
to be honest, he's not shilling his channel at all. I'm shilling it for him. Go and check out Shadow's channel as well. So yes, I'm going to have to draw it to a close because I do need to get my beauty sleeped. Be up for work in 8 hours from now. I think it's been we've stayed on topic tonight. We've stayed on topic.
Well, we did meander for a while in the middle with talking about armor and stuff rather than fighters.
That's part of the equation.
Yeah, of course it is. Yeah.
Because it does speak to how they've changed.
Yeah.
I'm still buying these, so Friday nights will be continuing with the read throughs. A bit of freeway fighter there, a bit of sort of fighting fantasy meets Car Wars. So that might be happening soon.
I don't know if I want to go onto an island with Jim Morrison. The Lizard King. But
so my pile of fighting fantasy books is behind there, and it's growing.
I'm going to bring up one other thing about you said with the low hit but having low hit points also makes every hit more impactful too.
Yes, that's something we haven't mentioned. Yes, indeed it does. It adds the fear to every combat,
as it should.
Yes. And on that note, I want to thank Elfbait, Omen Owl, Mage's Musings, and Saxius for joining in the conversation tonight. It's been an excellent conversation. Thank you, everyone in chat as well. Very constructive, very entertaining. Thank you all, and I'm going to sign off. Good night.
Have a good night, folks.